diagnosis quicker, and I appointed a panel of experts that is starting to meet. I met with.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.
Join us on Ottawa Eats. From fine dining to food trucks, we explore some of the best and most popular places to eat in the city. Discover a wide range of cuisines and taste some incredibly delectable food. Join us on Ottawa Eats.
Hello, I am Senator Lucie Moncion from Ontario. As we celebrate the birthday of the Confederation of our great and beautiful country, I wish you are among friends and family to commemorate this important event. We can be proud of Canada, its diversity, its inclusiveness, and its wealth that allows each and every one of us to live fully and freely. Let's celebrate together our wonderful country. Happy birthday, Canada.
Do you have something to share? Let everyone know about your next meeting, your need for volunteers, or your fundraising event on the Rogers TV Community Billboard. Send us your words and we'll bring them to life on Rogers TV and rogerstv.com. When it's time to spread the word, go to rogerstv.com to add your announcement to the community billboard.
Each week on Real Talk with Sarah, I'm joined by experts in the field of wellness who share their expertise and guide us to optimal health of mind, body, and soul. Join me Sundays at 8 p.m. for Real Talk with Sarah on Rogers TV.
This is Rogers TV, Ottawa.
We'll ask our colleague, Councillor Hubley, to introduce our special guest who will sing our national anthem.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to introduce my colleagues to Colleen Mahoney, who is an independent recording artist who has a passion not only for singing but songwriting as well. As a resident of Canada South, she began her musical journey with the Ottawa Catholic School Board Children and Chamber Choirs, where she sang for a collective of 8 years. She has also used her music to both raise awareness and funds for the Canadian Mental Health Association, Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, and other human rights causes. Please help me to welcome her in the singing of our national anthem. Thank you, Colleen.
Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command, qu'à ton bras s'est porté l'épée, il s'est porté la croix. Ton histoire est une épopée des plus brillants éclats. God keep our land glorious and free. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Well, thank you very much for that beautiful rendition of O Canada. It's my honor to invite Mr. Rohit Saxena to the podium for this Council City Builder Award presentation and his counselor, Councillor Carol-Ann Meehan. J'invite maintenant Rohit Saxena.
I'd like to invite Mr. Rohit Saxena to come to the podium for the Council's City Builder Award presentation with your City Council, Carol-Ann Meehan.
And Rohit has members of his family and office here, so welcome, bienvenue. Good morning. Rohit Saxena is being honored for this for his outstanding volunteerism and service to the community.
He's recognized for his years of volunteership and his devotion.
Photograph animals that are sheltered at the Ottawa Humane Society. He has been the lead photographer for over 10 years and has volunteered hundreds of hours to create professional studio portraits of Ottawa's stray animals. His work helps them look their best and ensures that they will have the best chance of being adopted and finding their forever homes. Rohit is a mentor for new photographers, and he photographs OHS events and activities for publications and advertising that helps to raise money and awareness of the value of shelter adoptions. In addition to his lead role in photography, Rohit continues to put in countless hours editing and creating images that reach out to the Ottawa community and help animals find permanent homes. He was recognized by the Humane Society at their 2016 AGM for his dedication and his tireless devotion to Ottawa's shelter animals. Rohit also supports the Carleton Student Engineering Society, where he has doubled student participation in social events and helped to raise funds for local charities. In his honor, the Engineering Society created the Rohit Saxena Award to recognize a graduating student who has made an unparalleled contribution to CSES's vision and leadership. Rohit was recently nominated for the Governor General's Sovereign Medal for volunteers that he is scheduled to receive here at City Hall in September. Je félicite Rohit d'avoir été nominé pour.
I'd like to thank him for having been nominated for the Governor General's Award.
To thank Rohit very much for his many contributions, and on behalf of your Councillor Carol-Ann Meehan, it's my pleasure to present you the Mayor's City Builder Award. Congratulations, keep up the great work.
Thank you.
Well done. Come on over here in front of the podium and we'll get a picture.
All right. About 10 years ago, I took up photography in my spare time and took a series of college courses. A friend of mine who volunteered at the Ottawa Humane Society found out that the previous photographer left and gave them my name. I quickly discovered that photographing adoptable animals requires help, not just a photographer, but animal wranglers as well. My wife helped until her first pregnancy, at which point my friends Matt Wells and Sally Anna Sachs joined on for the long haul. Their friendship and love for animals made every Sunday a joy. Before long, we were helping with OHS events like the Wiggle Waggle Walkathon and the Pride Parade. I also got to help tell stories of the extraordinary work OHS does for animals in extreme cases, and the trust animals could have for people, even after severe mistreatment at the hands of others. An influx of dogs from puppy mill closures in Quebec. Dogs like Breezy, beaten and left to die in a dumpster, rescued by the Ottawa Humane Society, their vets, and the family who gave her a forever home. Every week, we made it our mission to bring dignity and find beauty in every animal we met, with over 5,600 animal portraits taken already. We got to work on some really weird and wonderful projects for the Ottawa Citizen, showcasing adoptable animals with fun and wacky themes, including Game of Thrones, the Super Bowl, elections, and even just cats and bow ties. A few projects went viral, like a May the 4th Star Wars project that ended up on the web and in print worldwide, in outlets like CBS News and People magazine. Even Mark Hamill, Luke Skywalker himself, posted about it. Every Sunday morning, as long as we were healthy and in town, we took adoption photos of the Ottawa Humane Society. When my wife had our first child on a Sunday night, she sent me to OHS on. When she had our first child on a Saturday night, she sent me to OHS on Sunday morning. I wouldn't miss it. In June 2016, tragedy struck my family. We lost our beautiful daughter Jay to SIDS. We were devastated. I forgot how to live and how to work. But I came in to the Ottawa Humane Society the next Sunday morning and my friends Sally and Matt hugged me and gave me their support, and we helped the animals. It's probably the first normal thing I remembered how to do. At that time, I drew upon friends and the community for strength and help, and we found it in groups like the Roger Nielsen House, whose staff and volunteers helped me back to work and back to hope. Ottawa's always been my home. I went to school here. I studied engineering here, and I convinced my wife to stay here instead of returning to her hometown in Nova Scotia. This city and people were here for us when we needed it. Thanks to everyone for this tremendous honor. Thank you to Sally and Matt for helping out every week. Thanks to my wife Leslie for making sure the kids are taken care of when I come in, and for letting me spend too much money on the photography equipment we use for this. Thanks to my parents, my friends, and my work colleagues, and to the amazing people at the Ottawa Humane Society who make it all possible. Thanks to my dog Sprocket, whose love and loyalty inspires me to want to share the love of a pet and loving home with as many people as possible. Be the person your pet thinks you are. Thanks to my sons Navin and Talon for sharing their dad with the animals for a couple hours a week. And to my daughter Jaya, know that I do this for you. Thank you.
Roll call, please, Madam Clerk.
Councillor Luloff.
Ici.
Councillor Dudas.
Present.
Councillor Harder.
Here.
Councillor Suds. Here. Councillor El-Shantiri.
Present.
Councillor Gower. Councillor Kavanagh. Here. Councillor Shirelli.
Here.
Councillor Eglai.
Here.
Councillor Deans.
Here.
Councillor Tierney.
Present.
Councillor Fleury.
Ici.
Councillor King.
Here.
Councillor McKenney.
Present.
Councillor Leeper.
Here.
Councillor Brockington.
Here.
Councillor Menard.
Here.
Councillor Cloutier.
Présent.
Councillor Blais.
Here.
Councillor DeRose.
Here.
Councillor Moffat.
Here.
Councillor Meehan.
Here.
Councillor Hubely.
Here.
Mayor Watson.
Ici.
Le quorum est tient, Monsieur le Maire.
Merci.
We have quorum.
Minutes, adoption de procès-verbaux pour le 12 juin 2019. Carried.
12th June 2019.
Déclaration de conflit d'intérêts. Communications as presented. Regrets, absence. Councillor Glenn Gower advised he would be absent from the council meeting of 26th of June 2019. Motion to introduce reports. Motion portant présentation de rapport. Conseil Sud, s'il vous plaît.
Councillor Suds, please.
That the report from Hydro Ottawa Holding Inc. entitled Hydro Ottawa Holding Inc. 2018 Annual Report, Community and Protective Services Committee Report 4, Standing Committee on Environmental Protection, Water and Waste Management Report 3, Planning Committee Report 9, Built Heritage Subcommittee Reports 2 and 3, and the report from the City Clerk and Solicitor entitled Summary of Oral and Written Public Submissions for Items Subject to the Planning Act Explanation Requirements at the City Council meeting of June 12, 2019 be received and considered.
On the motion, carried, adopté, merci. Reports, rapport, Hydro Ottawa, Société de Hydro Ottawa. Item 1, Hydro Ottawa Holdings Inc. 2018 Annual Report. Well, we have the Chair of the Board, Mr. Jim Durrell, and CEO Bryce Conrad with us today. And the lights almost went out just as we introduced Hydro. I think that's for the screen, right?
That is.
So just a quick observation. As you know, Hydro was really punching above its weight during the aftermath of the tornado that affected so many communities. I know Councillor Deans and Eglai and certainly Councillor El-Shantiri and Councillor Brockington had communities that were severely devastated, and the Hydro workers did us all proud. So if you could pass along our collective thanks to those men and women who worked long hours to get the power restored, we'd very much appreciate that, and we'll hand the floor over to Mr. Durrell.
Thank you, Your Worship, and members of Council. I'm joined, of course, by Bryce Conrad, our CEO. Also here in attendance with me is Jeff Simpson, our Chief Financial Officer. We have Adnan Kokar, our Chief Energy Officer, and we have Julie Lupinacci, who is our Chief Customer Officer and done an outstanding job in terms of getting people engaged with hydro, and of course Tina Tardoli, who is in corporate strategy and does a great job for us there. As all of you know, this was a record year for Hydro Ottawa, and it was done so under some very trying circumstances. The dividend, which you are now all aware of, was for $22.3 million. I would say that you cannot expect the same next year. That dividend is comprised of a number of things, but included in that was our conservation demand program, which we have excelled at. The provincial government, as they have looked at hydros everywhere, have decided that those programs will be cancelled. Well, if they'll be replaced with something, we do not know. But I think we can assure you that the dividend will be somewhat lower next year. Because there's a number of new council members here, I'll just very quickly touch on how the dividend is paid, because a lot of people still think that we could lower rates instead of paying the dividend. Because we're a highly regulated business, our rates are established by the Ontario Energy Board. Unlike a normal company that gets its revenue and pays its dividends out of its net income, we earn our revenue. Our operating costs are basically break even, they're flow through. We really make our money from a regulated rate of return on our capital costs. And the thought process behind that, which was established many, many years ago, is one to ensure that we continue to reinvest in our assets at Hydro, that we continue to ensure that the quality of our electrical facilities, our generators, our transmitters, our poles, et cetera, are at the highest level. And out of that comes the dividend that we receive, or that you receive. And so it has absolutely zero impact on our rates. And other than, I guess, you receive $22 million, and hopefully I know you use it wisely and keep our tax rates low. If I could, I'd like to highlight three things. I know you've got an extremely busy agenda here today, and I'm so grateful all of these people came out to listen to Hydro. It's very nice. I didn't realize that Hydro, Your Worship, was such a popular subject. One is the evolution of your company, Hydro Ottawa. And at this, Hydro Ottawa's now got assets of almost $1.8 billion. We're a big company. And we are, at this time, the second lowest cost of energy producer in Ontario. We anticipate next year we will be the lowest. And so our size has not in any way hurt us in terms of our growth and our ability to do the things that are important to each one of you, which is to keep the power on in your respective wards. 30% of our growth is now in the unregulated end of the business. You know, if you'd sat here and this previous chair had been making a presentation to this council 8-10 years ago, 95 to 98% of our revenue would have come from a regulated end of the business. What's happening today is we all have much more efficient appliances. Everything is becoming more efficient. Consumption is dropping drastically. And so as a corporation, we are forced to diversify. And we have. We're at this time at Chaudière Falls, as you know, and I hope that each one of you would take advantage of this spectacular new viewing of a piece of our Ottawa history. But now 30% of all of our new revenue, and we anticipate over the next few years that will grow up to 45 and 50%. And as a reflection of that, we've taken Energy Ottawa and divided it into two new companies. One, Portage Power, that will handle all of our generation facilities, and two, an area that we anticipate will have some tremendous growth and that Adnan is looking over, and that's Envari. And Envari, of course, handles your street lighting, is working with ROPEC, and we think this is working with the NRC in a number of exciting issues, working with Zibi. We see some tremendous growth down the road for Envari. The second point I would like to touch on, and is something that I know is near and dear to this council, and that's the climate change that we are facing. As you all ran for an election, as His Worship had mentioned, we faced one of a number of terrible tornadoes in our city. We then endured one of the worst winters I can remember in my 72 years on this earth, and it was followed up with this flood that made 2017 look very calm. And despite what the President of the United States thinks, the world is changing, and it's changing rapidly, and there's no doubt in our minds, and we see it daily, and the men and women who work for Hydro see it daily, the effects of climate change. We are in the middle of adopting a climate vulnerability assessment adoption strategy, which is a big word. The company, just to show you how we are getting out in front on climate change in itself, this flood in 2018 was, as we all know, was catastrophic. And we saved probably close to 700,000 or more by getting out in front of it, by learning all of the things that we had done way back in 2017 that we didn't know then, the effects of a major flood on Chaudière and our other facilities. So we are making those changes. We spend close to $100 million a year in keeping our assets. We've got almost 50,000 poles in this city. And when poles go down and trees, simple little things that we see, what happens is the power goes out, you get a phone call, and all hell breaks loose. And so a great deal of money is spent on that. We are one of the top 50, and we have been for 5 years, greenest companies in Canada. And we think that that's a great testament to our recognition of climate change. And street lighting, as you know, Hydro Ottawa is engaged with the City of Ottawa. Before we started this program, you were using 50 million kilowatt hours to light our streets and our parks. In 3 years, when this program is complete, we'll be using 17 million kilowatt hours. That's 30%. That's an enormous change and an enormous saving. And as you know, we've now engaged and are starting to renovate many of the older facilities, starting with the Robert Pickard Centre, and we will be moving through many of the facilities here in Ottawa and providing further savings. And my third and final point, Your Worship, is the evolution of our board and senior management. We live in a time of diversity and gender challenges, and I point up there to the board that we have 5 women and 5 men. And I can say that I was approached about a month ago at a function I was at with the mayor, and as someone said, my goodness, that board is the quality of a major bank's board, and it is. And this is a big company that you own. And when I show you this board, you see Yaprak and Kim Butler, of course. Yaprak was a senior deputy minister. Kim is a highly regarded chartered accountant and CEO in our region. Matt Davies, next to him, is one of the most respected cybersecurity people in Canada and brings an enormous benefit to our board. That other fellow next to Matt, I'm not sure who he is. I'm just trying to remember his name. But we are very grateful, and I will say this, and this is not just blowing smoke, that Council has appointed 2 excellent people in Jan and in Stephen to represent us on the board. They've done a great job for you, and I'm thankful. Dale Craig, of course, was involved in building the Palladium as we knew it, the Ottawa Airport. Dale and I worked closely together, and now at Hydro Ottawa, a great engineer. Next to Jan is Andrea Johnson, and Andrea is a partner with Denton's, brings tremendous legal expertise to us and a help. Cyril Leader, known to all of you as a past president of the Senators and a really strong businessman. And last but not least is Laurie O'Neill, who is a CA, chairs our audit committee, and sits on the board of a number of public companies. This board, Council, is as good a board as you will ever find anywhere. And I know our president would support me on this, that a strong board holds management to account. And if we hold management to account, then we have done the job for each of you as councillors. Our senior management is 56% of female, and Diversity. And we are the founding signatory on Leadership Accord on Gender Diversity in the Electrical Industry of Canada. So that, Your Worship, is 3 points. I've tried to move through it quickly, not at the expense of all these people, as I say, who came out to listen to Hydro Ottawa and who are now walking away so much better informed and thankful.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Durrell. And questions and comments, Councillor Blais, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, Mr. Durrell and Bryce and the team for being here and for the excellent job you do managing this important asset for taxpayers. One of the provincial government's prime points during this most recent election was their desire to keep energy rates low. It reminds me that we have a significant portion of the City of Ottawa that pays higher energy rates than other parts of the city, and I'm wondering where if there have been additional conversations about harmonizing into one company. Have we discussed with the new government that potential and the potential ability to reduce rates for tens of thousands of Ottawa residents if such a thing were to take place?
Yeah, and one can't help but be sympathetic to those of you that represent the other areas. I think, as some of the older members of council in terms of service would recall, Bryce and I had brought the president of Hydro One and the chairperson up here. We had a lengthy meeting. We looked at how we could acquire, first, just the City of Ottawa. We then expanded it to say if we purchased the entire zone with Hydro One, so that Hydro Ottawa would handle everything to the Quebec border and right up through to Kingston. And if we had taken that, I would have been back before you. Hydro One would have sat on our board, which I had no issue with, and would have had an equity ownership in us in Hydro One, which again we would have presented to this council. It was not financially prudent for us to do it. We would literally had to have given up control of Hydro Ottawa to make the deal work. And I don't think that would fly very well with you or with this city and its people. As you know, since then, Councillor, there have been infinite number of changes going on at Hydro One. The CEO's been fired, the board's been fired, the chair is just down. We will pursue this again, but likely not for another 6 months to a year. They have to get settled themselves before we could ever have a meaningful discussion. Otherwise, it'd just be a lot of gum flapping and a waste of time.
Well, I appreciate that, and thank you for that detailed explanation of the efforts that have gone into it to date and where we might go in the future. Perhaps I missed this during the presentation. I'm wondering if there was a particular reason why the dividend was where it was this year as opposed to projections, etc.
We had a very strong year, but in our dividend was almost $4 million from our conservation demand work. And Hydro Ottawa, being one of the greenest employers in Canada for many years, did a heck of a job in that regard. And we maximized almost as much as we could the monies that we would receive for the government in our conservation demand programs. What will happen next year is those programs have been canceled by the provincial government as they reevaluate how they wish for the local LDCs like ourselves to deliver power. And we're not anticipating anything in the magnitude of what we had with previous governments. And so it would be prudent for us just to tell you in advance that you'll likely get less, not through any operational inefficiencies of Hydro Ottawa, but because we are working within a different political environment.
Okay, well, I appreciate that, Mr. Durrell. Mr. Mayor, given the news on the dividend, I do have a motion, and I'm wondering if it's appropriate to introduce that at this time, or?
Yes, it would be.
Thank you very much. Whereas at its meeting of March 6, 2019, as part of consideration of the 2019 draft operating capital budget, City Council adopted the following. that any surplus in the Hydro Ottawa dividend received in the 2018 to 2022 term of council, that is the amount that exceeds the projected amount in the long-range financial plan, be directed towards energy efficiency, conservation, or renewable energy programs within Ottawa, with specific projects to be recommended by staff and approved by the Standing Committee on Environmental Protection, Water and Waste Management and Council once the specific dollar amount, if any, is known. And whereas subsequent to the adoption of the draft 2019 budgets, unforeseen events have occurred that affect the assumptions upon which the 2019 draft budget was based, including as follows: the 2019 spring flood, which required the City of Ottawa to be in a state of emergency from April 25th to June 12th of this year, and a tornado in Orleans that required the city to go into enhanced operations between June 2nd and June 7th. Whereas flood mitigation and climate adaptation is a key priority of the Standing Committee on Environment Protection, Water and Waste Management, and whereas the City Treasurer has advised that for this year, in order to address the additional unforeseen expenses related to the unusually harsh winter, flooding events described above, she recommends that the hydro dividend surplus be used to balance the 2019 budget as required by the province. And whereas it is reasonable to assume that Council had known about these events and the budget impacts on or before the adoption of the 2019 budget, they may have made a different decision, and that the City Clerk and Solicitor has advised that, in his opinion, the City Treasurer's request is not reconsideration of the budget, but new information, and therefore be it resolved that City Council approve any surplus over the hydro dividend budgeted at $20 million be directed to the Tax Stabilization Fund, be applied to the costs associated with the City's response to the 2 environmental emergencies expressed to date this year, less $500,000 already committed by Council through motion EPWWM0107.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Brockington, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Not on the motion yet, but just a question to Misters Conrad and Durrell. First of all, thank you for your presentation. Appreciate it. And thank you for the dividend. If it's not clear, we appreciate the dividend and thank you. Very much needed. Mr. Conrad, last year I asked you a question and I asked you what keeps you up at night, because I wanted to better understand the risks locally and more globally for hydro companies. And in the context of climate change that Mr. Durrell spoke about, we know that the projected forecasts for Eastern Ontario are going to include in the future more ice storms and ice events. And I just want to know, with the impact on transmission towers and residential and local business connections, are you able to protect the system any better, or is it still going to be more reactive to these events, fix damaged infrastructure and move on? Or is there any way that we can strengthen the entire system knowing that this is going to be coming?
Yeah, thank you for your question. If I had the opportunity to revisit my answer from last year, I'd have said a tornado would have kept me up at night. The short answer is climate change is here. We're seeing it. Yeah, the slide that was up there showed, I think, 12 different instances last year. We had an ice storm, we had a windstorm. We dispatched crews down to help out with hurricanes and tornadoes down south, only to come back to deal with 6 tornadoes in our backyard, followed by, as Mr. Durrell said, the spring flood this year, which was a 1 in a 1,000-year level. So the short answer to your question is that's what keeps me up at night. It's that climate change. It's the stuff I don't know. To quote Donald Rumsfeld, it's the unknown unknowns. Your question with respect to hardening the infrastructure, that is what we are doing on a day-to-day basis. As part of our next rate application, we will be undertaking a climate change adaptation mitigation strategy that goes into that process. That will guide how we build going forward. So the short answer is it's going to be a question of both reacting and proactively building new infrastructure and building that new infrastructure to a higher level. So the 1 in 100-year flood level, which we seem to hit every 3 years, is no longer sufficient.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Mayor, I don't see Ms. Simulek, but can we get a comment from staff with respect to the motion before us, particularly identifying where the monies are going to and just verifying that this is the top priority?
Mr. Mayor, Ms. Simulek is away on vacation. If we want to get into the details, Isabel Jasmine, our Deputy Treasurer, is here, but staff are fully supportive of the direction that's being proposed in this motion with respect to the disbursement of the dividend.
And will that cover off the costs associated with these emergencies?
Mr. Mayor, to date, we've asked departments to report back by July 31st, the deadline to compile all the costs. But just to date, even though that date has not arrived, we're up to $5.6 million for the impacts of the events of this year.
Because past, not surpluses, but additional surpluses and above what was anticipated, we had identified certainly road projects. We identified some environmental initiatives as well. So there were some other priorities council have identified in the past. I'm not saying that what is being proposed now isn't important. I just want to make sure we're all aware that there are some other options out there, but obviously we have to address the costs associated with these two emergencies. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you very much. First of all, I just want to thank you for your efforts on gender equity. Not only is it important, it's just smart. And efforts on being green and the ongoing work of your crew out there. I know they're always appreciated. I've always had an opportunity to go up and chat with them, and they're very friendly and welcoming and very positive. My question to you is about nuclear energy. You're talking about clean energy. How much of our energy is coming from nuclear, and what efforts are you making to go to renewable energy?
So we don't control the mix at the provincial level. So the short answer to your question, about 52 to 56% of the base load in the province of Ontario is from the nuclear reactors. So that is a provincial decision, it's a provincial determinant. We have grown our renewable assets to represent about 110,000 homes worth of green power. We feed that into the grids. So we have no control over the mix at the provincial level.
If you've just grown it, why couldn't you grow it more in terms of renewable?
We've grown our renewable generation fleet by 500% in 6 years. So we're doing it. We're doing our damnedest to become greener and greener and make it more and more green. But the province is in a surplus position at the moment with having surplus electricity. So they're not in the world of procuring new sources of energy.
Well, if we can make a goal or ask them to make a goal of reducing nuclear, that would be a positive step. Are we in a position to do that?
Again, council may be at this point. The nuclear reactor is on or it's off. It's not. You can't sort of harmonize and get it, tweak it a bit. So.
I understand.
That base load is controlled by the independent electricity system operator. So.
Okay. Well, I hope we'll work towards that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Menard, please.
Thanks very much, Mayor. Am I able to speak to the motion as well as other items? Okay. So maybe I'll just start actually first on another item. I really appreciate all the work you folks have done, had good meetings with you, and just wanted to say I also appreciate the potential willingness to work with us on the retrofit of our buildings as well. I know there's a lot of deep retrofits that we could use that could save this city a lot of money over time with a return. So I just wanted to say thank you for the analysis you've done on that side. On the motion that's before us, I'm a bit concerned with the fact that we as a council have made a clear decision on this. That was done through Environment Committee, Standing Committee on Environment, came forward to City Council, Council voted on it collectively. I support the position of the motion itself that we need to be finding more to make sure that we're putting towards these incidents that have occurred in our city, certainly. But in terms of where these dividends are going above the 20 million, council's made a decision on that. We've decided. And so I'm a little concerned with going back on the decision that we've already, again, considered through Environment Committee, brought forward to council and made that decision. So I'm not sure if this is something that we should be really voting on here. So I guess what I would say is in order to make sure that we're fully considering what we've already passed at council, this motion should be referred back to Environment Committee. Environment Committee has decided this. It came to Council. We decided on it there. And so in any event, we should be deciding back at Environment Committee for where these funds go. So I guess I would just say motion to refer back to committee. We've been doing this a lot lately, Mayor, referring back to committee to make sure that the appropriate conversation happens there. So I would just put that forward that we should refer this back to committee.
Okay, you'll need a seconder. And my understanding is, Councillor, your report on climate change emergency required $250,000. We're actually doubling that to $500,000 in this motion. So
I'll just comment briefly on that.
But do you have a seconder for referral?
Sure. I've talked to a number of council colleagues. Councillor Moffat seconding. In terms of the total, certainly my motion required that, yes, for a staffing component, but I know staff are already doing their planning for the amount that they feel is coming forward for things like energy evolution and our next phase of investment there for this money. They've already started booking those funds for climate change mitigation and adaptation. So this would be a real concern, I know, to some portions of our staff, and that's why I want to refer it back to Environment Committee so we can have the full discussion there.
Okay, thank you. Who's your seconder?
Councillor Moffat.
Okay, so on referral now, we're not talking about the substance of the motion except to refer it. Do you want to speak on referral, Councillor Leeper?
Thanks, Mayor. The motion to refer is, I think, the appropriate one. We need to understand the spending plans that our environment staff have already undertaken. We're throwing a number of different figures out into the air. I think it's important for Council to take time to digest what the implications of this motion would be. I don't think it is appropriate to have something this important come to the table in this fashion. And I would like to, frankly, hear from residents. I'd like to hear from residents about what their priorities are before I vote on this, and referring it back to committee would give us the opportunity to accomplish that. So I'll be supporting Councillor Menard and Moffat's motion.
Okay, on referral, Councillor Aguilai.
Actually, Mr. Mayor, my questions related to the motion itself, so I'll wait and put myself back on after the referral.
Councillor Blais on referral.
Thanks very much, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Kanellakis, the $5-odd million that's been spent already on the cleanups, where has that money, or whose budgets has that come out of?
Well, it's been coming, Mr. Mayor, it's been coming out of the operational budgets of the various departments, but we've been coding all the costs to a central account so we can track all the costs, and then the treasurer will be allocating whatever surpluses we have or from the tax stabilization fund funds to cover off those expenses in the various departments.
But it's reasonable to assume that a large number of the staffing resources that were used are staff that whose budgets would otherwise stream up to the Community and Protective Services Committee and or other committees.
It'd be primarily Transportation Committee, Community and Protective Services Committee would be the two main committees that would have experienced the expenditures.
So, Mr. Mayor, the two committees that have experienced the spending crunch are the Community and Protective Services Committee and the Transportation Committee, and yet we're going to send the decision on money we've already spent and need to recover to a third committee entirely. It doesn't seem to me that is reasonable. This is not deciding on if we want to do something extra. This is money that has already been spent, and so we need to figure out where we're taking from in order to spend that. That is a decision that the entire council as a whole should make, not a single committee, especially when the expenses that are or out of kilter are from two different committees altogether. So I would not support referring it to the Environment Committee.
Councillor Harder, please.
I'm going to ask you not to support referral either. You know, the gravy train hasn't pulled up to the station here. We're very fortunate that we have Hydro Ottawa, a company that we own entirely, that does the fantastic work that they do. as somebody that's served on the board for a long time and somebody that has been at this council for a long time, and certainly I look at Councillor Deans, Councillor Shirelli, and a few others that remember after amalgamation how incredibly difficult it was to keep the power on and the investments that this company has made. You know, I think it would be different we'd having this conversation and sending it to referral if we hadn't had the catastrophe that we had. You heard Councillor Blais say the pressures financially to Community Protective Services and to the Transportation Department. We have people, I guess, public consultation, Councillor Leeper, sure. Who are you going to go and talk to? The people in Barrhaven? You know what? We didn't struggle too much with the flood. In fact, we didn't struggle at all. Maybe we'll go to Constance Bay and talk to those people. Remember, we had to engage our own staff, which I'm sure we don't even have a number on that, Mr. Mayor, in the last 4 days to clean up the rest of the bags because our volunteers in this city were just too damn tired and couldn't go out and do it and face the attack of the bugs caused from the flooding and everything else. So it makes absolutely no sense to have a public consultation about something that truly was a catastrophe for many people in our city. That's why I think Councillor Kavanagh is seconding it. She saw it, was witness to it in her own area. Certainly Councillor Blais, because he's witness to it in his own area. I say, taking this extra money, which thank you, Hydro Ottawa, very much for your good work through very difficult times, to contribute not only the dividend but this extra money, of which you're going to double the money that you would have got anyways, but to put that towards helping clean up, helping the costs that are associated with the catastrophe that we had, with the climate change catastrophe, then that is really, makes no sense to refer this. It makes absolutely no sense. So I'm asking you all not to support referral. This is not this is not you know, Christmas bonus and we get to see how we're going to spend it. This is money that we need to spend wisely, and this is the right place to put it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor McKenney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will be supporting referral, but I do want to make the point that you know, the notion that, you know, we shouldn't be talking to our own constituents or that we should be going out, not be going out to talk to constituents. I have never ever thought for a sec that we shouldn't be supporting people in need in the flooded areas. Of course we should. But I just want to point out, because I think it's worth noting publicly that, you know, a week before the flooding, there was a fire in my ward. A rooming house burned, and 30 people ended up homeless. 23 of those people, a week later, were sleeping on the street. They had nowhere to go. The shelters are full, and there was nowhere for people to sleep. So I just want to, I take offense to the fact that by referring this motion, somehow we're hard-hearted or we're not thinking about people in need. There was no support for 23 people who were homeless. I got one extra night in a hotel for them. So let's make sure when we're making decisions around this table, we're considering the whole city.
Councillor Dudas, please.
Just a follow-up question to what Councillor Blais had asked to our city manager. So the money's already spent. I'm just trying to understand, if we don't allocate this money towards filling in that gap, towards filling in the money that's already gone, what does that mean for our services, for our front line? Like, what kind of pressure are we going to be feeling in terms of trying to find that money somewhere else?
Mr. Mayor, you know, everything eventually falls to the bottom line, as our treasurer often tells us. And so if the funds aren't replaced, that money would have to be made up from other services from now to the end of the year. We'd have to make an effort to cut back on other initiatives that we've undertaken at the direction of council. And at the end of the year, if we haven't made up that surplus, we'd have to go into our tax stabilization reserve anyways to be able to fund whatever deficit was created by these unexpected events. We don't build these into our budget. We do a risk-based budget, and the fact that this happened unexpectedly is something that has to be made up somehow within the various services within the year or from reserve funds.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anyone else on referral? Councillor Menard to wrap up.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Mr. Mayor. I guess there's a couple of things I wanted to just address because this has come forward at the last minute of council. None of us saw this motion. It was very quick, and I think you've been very clear. You want to see items come through committee. That is the proper process. Come through committee, come to council. Well, in this case, there's a lot of deliberation that should go on about what is needed, which areas this should come for the flooding, how much money is potentially going to be needed to start addressing the climate change emergency motion that we passed here. And that deliberation doesn't happen on a whim like this. I think you've been clear in the media and otherwise talking about that. So I think it's important that we send this back to the committee that originally brought it. This council passed this motion already. You could say that there's new information about a number of motions, spending motions that we've already passed here. We've spent a lot of money in this term so far, and you could go back on many of those decisions and say, hey, we want to reallocate that, but it's been chosen for this one. So at least give the committee the chance to deliberate on it, to make sure staff can bring forward more information before we pass it. I'm not saying that some of these funds won't go towards these important priorities. Some of them, of course, should and may. But let's at least have the deliberation properly before we go ahead and just do this willy-nilly here, especially when there's other potential booked funding with this. So I just wanted to raise that and make sure that people understand that this is something that's happening on the fly. None of us saw this. Let's take the time and deliberation to consider this properly, as we've been saying. Thank you.
I'd encourage members of council to not support referral for the simple reason Councillor Dudas hit the nail on the head. This is money that's already been spent. It's not a new request for future spending. That's the difference. The tornadoes took place, the flooding took place in the various communities from east to west to south in our city. So we're not having a debate about whether there was a tornado or not. There was a tornado. We spent the money. We've been told by staff it's now well over $5 million that we've incurred in overtime, sand costs, personnel, equipment, and so on. So it's a wide difference between wanting to spend money in the future versus an event that has already taken place that we didn't budget for. How could we possibly budget for 2 tornadoes and 2 floods within the span of 3 years? So I would encourage you to support or not support the resolution to refer it and deal with it right here at City Council. And just to remind members, as I said, we went from $250,000 that the councillor asked for up to $500,000, and the rest of the money should go to help with the past cost of the cleanup in the various communities, whether it's in Britannia or whether it's Cumberland or West Carleton or Orleans with the tornado. And so I'd encourage members of council to vote no on referral. Yeas and nays, please.
Councillor Tierney.
No.
Councillor Hubley.
No.
Councillor Luloff.
No.
Conseil Fleury.
Oui.
Councillor Moffat.
Yes.
Councillor Harder.
No.
Councillor Derouz.
No.
Councillor El Shantiri.
No.
Councillor Gower. Councillor Suds.
No.
Councillor Eglai.
Yes.
Councillor Blais.
No.
Councillor Leeper.
Yes.
Councillor McKenney.
Yes.
Conseil Cloutier.
No.
Councillor Kavanagh.
No.
Councillor Meehan.
No.
Councillor Shirelli.
Yes.
Councillor Brockington.
No.
Councillor King.
Yes.
Councillor Menard.
Yes.
Councillor Dudas.
No.
Councillor Deans.
Yes.
Mayor Watson.
No.
9 yeas, 14 nays.
Okay, other questions to our hydro delegation?
Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Harder. Councillor Harder, questions, comments?
Yeah, I just wanted to switch back to why you're here, and I'm sorry that you that we couldn't have found a way for, to end your presentation. As I was saying when I was speaking to the referral, when I think about the fact that from 2006 to 2009, we were spending 30% of over 30% of all capital money in Canada trying to correct the situation in Canada that was causing unbelievable outages all the time. And that investment in this community, now your next investment's going to be out in Councillor Moffat in my area, which is badly needed for growth in that. And I applaud you on your plans, your long-range plans. As somebody who has watched over the years, I certainly have appreciated it. And I just wanted to say, congratulations for all of your award-winning work on conservation demand management. Yeah, it's a changer now. It's a change for sure now that the province is changing. But I'm sure that you're going to step up to the plate again and follow a new path, and congratulations to you and your team. You talked about the board that we have. The incredible lineup of chiefs you have is fantastic, and I have all confidence in. I wanted to say on a personal level, as somebody that had 90,000 people that didn't have any power for 3 days during the tornadoes. We didn't have the terrible damage that we saw in other areas, but just having the information that you led on, that information was crucial to, I think, making our city well and giving us information, and information is always power, I think, for the folks. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Harder. I should have, at the outset, this is my first opportunity to speak to council since the tornado, but we want to, on behalf of the company, thank you for what you did collectively, but also for what you didn't do. Waking up Saturday morning, realizing that half the city was dark and out of power, there was plenty of opportunity for you to second guess us and sort of start to fire off the tweets at us, and collectively you didn't. You were incredibly supportive, helped us get messaging out when we couldn't get messaging out ourselves, and for that we owe you a debt of gratitude. Thank you.
All right, Councillor Leeper, please.
Oh, no, it's myself,
sorry,
Mr.
Councillor Tierney.
Thank you very much, Bryce. A great report, and I appreciate all you guys do. And I want to thank you personally. I guess I had a situation in my ward a few weeks ago with a lamp that was down. The second I called you, it was picked up and replaced within a day. So thank you. Forgive me if I missed it. How far along are we on the LED conversion project?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you. And we're obviously happy to have helped out in that situation. The project was initially set as a 4-year project. We projected a 50% savings in the energy threshold that Mr. Durrell referred to. The project will come in 6 months faster, so it'll be done by the end of this calendar year. And the current projected savings are about 67%, so the savings are higher than we anticipated. So it's a win, 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 win.
One more win. Now, one more question. Smart cities, Jan, myself, and Al really worked very closely with you in Hydro Ottawa in the past about smart cities. And some of the discussions were around smart lighting in the heads, gunshot detection within the light heads. Have we looked at that as pilots or something within the city?
We've explored some piloting. We have some pilots going on out in the Orleans area, I believe, with respect to meteorological data that we're picking up off there. But those poles the lights are all created and they're all IP addressable, so you can put anything on any one of those poles, and they're ready for it. We tried to future-proof the technology for you to allow you to do that. So gunshot detectors, closed-circuit TV cameras, meteorological devices, traffic devices, any of those things can be put on those poles.
Great. Thank you very much for that.
All right. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Leeper, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Bryce, if I may pick up on the last point you made with respect to the power outages. Obviously, in Kitchissippi, we were without power for 54 hours. It was great working with you. Congratulations on getting the power back up and running so quickly. At the time, you spoke with residents about the failure of the communications infrastructure at Hydro. I think we had an opportunity to chat a few times about that, but where are you in terms of making that communications infrastructure more robust to help residents get more of the information during events like those?
Yeah, if you go back to the dark days of the tornado, our system was, our outage map, which is what everybody was looking for, was getting in excess of a year's worth of hits in a matter of hours. And the database that was underpinning it just got, quite frankly, confused. It was so busy reloading and reloading. It was never, it failed. So I made the commitment that we would fix that. That has been fixed. It is capable of being, flexing up to a much higher number. I don't want to test it at 150,000 again, if we can all agree on that. But it is much more robust than it otherwise was. We also have the ability with our social media, which I think was one of the success stories through the tornado. We have effectively created a bot that allows that pumps out Twitter messages automatically, no matter what time of day or night. Basic outage information kind of thing. You're not going to get that personal stuff that you were getting during the tornado, but just the general information would be getting out there. And we look for any and all other opportunities. I think we've launched podcasts. I think we did, I didn't know this, but a product called Periscope that allows you to sort of go out and follow the crews around and do live shots. So we've been using those as well. Anything and everything we can do to sort of pass along the message as to how extensive the damage is. I think, if you looked at the success of the flood, lack of them, poor choice of words on my part, but the drone footage that when we put the drone up over Shawjare Falls and you see the full scale and scope of that flooding, it's fantastic. But that's something that we can do now with the drone technology we have. So it's always going to be a work in progress, Councillor. I certainly appreciate your support in getting the message out. As I said, councillors generally were fantastic. The messaging that we were sending out during the tornado was being retweeted and resent out on your behalf, and that's all we could ask for.
No, that's fantastic, and I am glad to hear that you consider that that's been fixed. I presume you've gone to some sort of a scalable cloud solution for the server.
Indeed.
Yeah, wonderful. That's all. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Right, thanks, Councillor. Councillor Moffat.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to, primarily on the motion about the dividend surplus. One is, so we, working with Councillor Eglai, both last year and this year, spoke to how we could use any surplus if there was some, and amazing that there is some, to be perfectly honest. When we had talked about this a few months ago, knowing what had taken place in the fall, I wasn't sure there would be a surplus. I figured with all the efforts that you had to put in, the whole notion of bypassing a major power station in order to get supply back to the communities that I represent, that Councillor Harder represents, by that Sunday evening was somewhat crazy in that it actually worked. I mean, because that was a big concern in those communities, that the residents out there understood fully that what they were going through with the lack of power paled in comparison to what other communities are going through. So they were very understanding. But the fact that you were able to succeed in that was incredible, and that's why I wasn't sure there would be a surplus. The fact that there is, and one of the things that we did at committee was speak to how we could fund energy efficiency projects. A lot of the things that you do with Enviri are very similar to that, finding ways to be more efficient throughout the city with our buildings, and a number of other projects that we can do that help save money, but also are wise investments for the city. So that was the intent of the motion. That's what we made clear. That was approved here at council. I understand that things happen. There are emergencies. I don't not support the motion in front of you. I do appreciate the fact that we're retaining some of the surplus for its intended purpose back in March. But I do want to mention one thing. There is a budget at the city called the Tax Stabilization Fund, and that is what is supposed to be used for emergencies. It formerly was known as the one-time and unforeseen. Unfortunately, we spent a lot of time funding things out of that budget that were not unforeseen. So it's no longer called the unforeseen budget. But it is a tax stabilization fund. And what it's not for is for funding projected budget shortfalls. And that's what we did earlier this year. We used it to fund a projected budget shortfall instead of making the budget whole in one of our departments at the city, not necessarily a department, it's an arm's length department. It's also known as the Ottawa Police Services Board. In the future, and I don't know what's going to happen with the surplus in the future, there might not be a surplus next year. The motion that council approved back in March set forward a path for the entire term. What I don't want to see is, if there is a future surplus, that we keep on coming back to the floor of council and revisiting our March 2019 decision to use that fund for energy evolution, for renewable projects under the leadership of Steve Willis. That's where that money was to go. I want to make sure that we are maintaining that principle that we set earlier this year, and that things like the tax stabilization fund are not used, are not cherry-picked to balance budgets that we know are not full. That fund is there for the end of the year if there are issues. You know, it's been very beneficial to have a very healthy reserve at the City of Ottawa. We haven't touched reserves on snow removal for many years. That's because we manage the budgets, and we're able to backfill that if necessary, but we haven't needed to, which is tremendous. But these funds are for emergencies like this, where we wouldn't have to be worried about falling short and having to use funds that we didn't know were going to come. So in the future, I'd prefer to get some commitments. I realize that might be difficult, but that we wouldn't keep on coming back to revisit a previous decision and take money away from things that we committed to in order to fund emergency things, that we stick to budgets like the tax stabilization fund. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Englund, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Two things I wanted to say. One is Bryce, I wanted to just take the opportunity to thank Hydro. The tornado was a very challenging time, to say the least. Probably one of the most difficult times since I've been elected. And you and I had many talks, text communications at all hours of all days over that 2 or 3 week period. There was never a time I could not reach out and hear back from Hydro on a concern from a resident. So I want to take this opportunity to publicly thank you and the board for being there. It was a difficult time, and to your comment, I don't think there's anybody in my ward that blames Hydro for what happened. What they do is they thank Hydro for getting the power back on, for being very solicitous and considerate of the situation that people were in. So I wanted to pass that on in a public forum, because God knows we don't have to go through that again, but if we do have to, I'm happy to say that you'll be my partner in that. So thank you for that. Now to turn the attention to the motion. Councillor Moffat, there's really not much I can add. When the motion was passed, it was passed for a purpose, and there was good and robust discussion around it. And this is not to say that I'm not supportive of helping out and supporting what happened in my colleagues' wards. But like Councillor Moffat, I would like to know, and I don't know how you do that, Mr. Kanalakis, I'm looking at you, because the treasurer's not here, how you give us some confirmation that we won't come back year over year. I mean, the motion was quite clear. For the term of council, that's what was going to happen to the surplus. So I don't know what you can say today or do today to answer the concern that Councillor Moffat's brought up and that I share, as we were the original movers of the motion, that we're not going to keep coming back year after year if there is a surplus to take that money for something else.
Mr. Mayor, you know, there's no way I can obviously guarantee that, because we have, as a city, we have many unexpected events that occur. I think this is an unusual period of time. I've been around many years, 34 years now. I've never seen this kind of activity in a 3-year period that has demanded the level of resources that we've had to expend to be able to manage these situations. You know, I like to think of things sort of over a longer term, and generally, when you look back over time, we've been able to smooth out the rough edges and the bumps within our own means and deal with the budget without having to dip into many of these areas. I think this is a unique situation where you couldn't make this up if you tried, quite frankly. And so I think it's unusual. I think it requires a unique solution to get us out of the hole we're in. But I have a lot of confidence in the way, if you look at the last 3 years, if you remember in 2015, we had a $42 million deficit, operating deficit in this organization. From 2016 on, we've had a surplus every year, despite the fact we've had a lot of things happen, a lot of events, everything from sinkhole to bus crashes to you name it. We've had a lot of things that have happened, and we managed to eke out a surplus. That's the strength of our management team here at the table. This is very unique. It requires a unique solution.
Okay. Thank you for that answer, and I will support the motion this morning.
Can I just ask, does anyone have a question to our hydro delegation, because they have to be on their way? Is there anything we can come back to you on the motion? Councillor Fleury, do you have any questions? Councillor Blais to hydro? Okay, so our hydro reps, Mr. Durrell and Mr. Bryce. Thank you very much. Bryce Conrad. Okay, Councillor Eglai, please.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you for the answer, Mr. Kanellakis, and I do appreciate it's challenging times. I guess I'll just sum up by saying I will be supporting the motion. I do see the need, but I would hope next time around, if something like this did happen, and God forbid that it should, but if something like this should happen again and we have to have this discussion, that it'd be a more process-driven discussion, that there'd be more notice and more opportunity to have dialogue about what is going to happen to this collective money of the whole city and where it's going to be put. So I'll just leave that on the table. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Conseil Fleury, s'il vous plaît.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I want to echo Councillor Moffat's comments and parts of Councillor Eglai's. I won't revisit those comments, but I have two questions one for our clerk relating to the motion. So when I read the therefore be it resolved, there's no date attached, but this reflects only a financial contribution of whatever is in excess of 20 million and minus the 500,000 for the year of 2019? Or does it include beyond that?
Mr. Mayor, I read it as just the 2019 dividend.
Okay. And then Mr. Kanellakis, we have an amazing team that responds and adapts to the various situations we have in our city. I've seen it firsthand. Most wards have seen these sorts of climate emergencies and environmental issues and fires and sinkholes and so on. I want to know from your perspective, how do you operationalize those pressures year after year, and why is it different this time around? Because I feel like we just go out, we do the work, we don't question, and that's great, but then the past, we've just covered it, it's happened, so why is it any different this year?
Mr. Mayor, we haven't, in terms of covering it in the past, I mean, I think, I'd have to go back and get some clarification from our finance in terms of how we covered some of the past. We had pressures in the past. The extraordinary thing about this year, particularly in the flood, I would say recently in terms of the cost, we're almost triple the cost of what we were in 2017, from what I can tell. We reached a level of engagement because of the protracted nature of the incident. The water level stayed high for almost 3 weeks. The work that was required to remove the sandbags, we put basically 5 times the number of sandbags in this year compared to 2017. We had the Army here. That was an extra 1,000 personnel filling sandbags. The level of effort for this time surpassed what we normally can absorb within the natural to and fro surpluses we have in the departments. And that's on top of the other things we responded to, particularly the winter we had. So you have a winter where, we're under incredible pressure. It snowed almost every day but 2 days. And that put us over the edge too. So it was a convergence of circumstances that drove an incredible budget pressure for us that makes this the unique situation that I described.
Thank you for that. And just a follow-up, if council was to not make a decision on that matter today, I mean, we'll make a decision on the vote in a few minutes, but want to know how would you live with that? How would that pressure be adjusted or adapted? Would you require a motion of council, or would you, like Councillor Moffat spoke about, going into some of the reserve pockets to address that pressure?
Well, your option is always the tax stabilization reserve ultimately, but we need that for future years. We're trying to protect that amount to deal with unforeseen circumstances going into the future. That fund has been consolidated, as you approved before. And the challenge now being July is we basically have half a year to try and find that money within the departments, in addition to what was reported to the deficit we're running, or the deficit in the snow budget we're running based on the bad winter. So it would really mean a rethinking of and a delving back into budgets for the remainder of the year. And half a year, we basically have to find double the amount to be able to fund this and get ourselves back into a surplus situation. I also want to remind Council, Mr. Mayor, that we are expecting provincial impacts going into 2020. We've got a deferral, and that helped us, but we need to protect our financial position, and that would be my recommendation going into 2020, so that we don't end up in a significant deficit coming out of 2019, which takes away your flexibility to fund the programs that you may want to fund going into 2020. And I think that long view is what's important here, in that we're able to come out of 2019 in a balanced position so that we can address the 2020 pressures, which we know, based on early assessments, are going to be a significant challenge on top of all the normal pressures we face building the 2020 budget.
Okay. Thank you for that. I was not going to support the motion because it wasn't clear to the years, but I appreciate Mr. O'Connor clarifying that this is only for 2019. This is obviously, we've all had to live with the impacts over the last few months, and certainly want to make sure that our financial abilities to adapt continue. But that said, I think this needs, we need to find a structure so that if and when floods happen, or if and when fires happen, or if and when there's other issues, that we go back to the account. So, for me, I really treat this personally, my vote here will be as an exception relating to this surprise situation, but knowing that climate change is impacting us, we'll need to identify appropriate funds going into the 2020 budget to be able to cover these surprise responses.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Shantiri.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I want to thank my colleagues, both of them, for moving that motion. But Mr. Kanellakis, before I speak about the motion, the amount of money we spend, we will not be able to recover any of it from the province, because the rules is, if I remember correctly, and I think somebody can correct me, we have to spend 3% of our total infrastructure budget before we qualify for provincial assistance. Is that correct?
Mr. Mayor, yes, 3% of our operating budget, which is approximately $3.4 billion, so that puts you up almost $100 million before we can recover anything.
So in order to qualify for provincial funding to this, we have to spend basically the $100 million.
That's correct, Mr. Mayor.
So I don't know what else to say, Mr. Mayor, other than I know, again, I might have to declare conflict of interest. I'm not sure. Mr. O'Connor will tell me if I would. You said no, good. Folks, when I hear around the table, we should be prepared, or we should be budgeting for the unforeseen. I don't know how, unless somebody have a crystal ball, share with us. I'm not sure what you can see. This part of the country, we never saw tornadoes probably in 100 years. We saw 6 of them in West Carleton 2018. 2017 flood, they told us that was the flood of the 100 years, and we bought into it. We thought, this is it. This is the 100 years flood. It was 91 years exactly. In 2019, we had 26 centimeters of water more, and if you ask me today, I would say the Ottawa River on the verge to flooded again today. Today is still considered to be high water compared to another year. So I'm not not sure, I mean, really, if we are really concerned about environment, climate change or environmental change or whatever, those unforeseen events, I think the way we're doing this with this motion, I think that will address all these concerns. And I'm not sure, honestly, why we're debating this, because really is a step in the right direction to be able to deal with the unforeseen weather effect on all of us. So I hope you will support this motion. And I want to thank both my colleague, the mover and the seconder, for bringing up this motion.
Thank you, Councillor. To wrap up, Councillor Blais on his motion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. As everyone knows, we did not know that there would be a hydro dividend surplus. We certainly didn't know it would be, close to 10% or more than 10% of the dividend in and of itself. This is unforeseen money. And this motion asks that $500,000 of it be directed towards the area of funding that Council had asked for the surplus to be directed. The $5+ million we've already spent. We need to find it from somewhere. And the departments in which it's been spent are the departments that, in fairness, we have most of the pressure. It's the guys that plow the snow in the wintertime. The sand they put on the streets and the sidewalks in the wintertime is a lot of the sand we use to fill the sandbags. It's our firefighters and our paramedics and all the other emergency service personnel. So last winter we heard we didn't have enough money for snow clearing, and now we don't want to refresh the money for winter operations we used for flood mitigation. That to me doesn't make a lot of sense. I think the city manager is absolutely right. We need to take the long view on this. If there are corrections people want to make to areas of funding for the budget going forward, we're going to be into that exercise in the fall. But right now we have $5 million in expenses we need to cover. We've got $2 million plus that we weren't expecting to have. That still leaves us $2 to $3 million we need to find. The work's not over. So I would encourage everyone to support this transfer and then roll up their sleeves to find another $3 million. And if you want to invest more in other programs later, let's work on the budget in the fall. But right now we've got to deal with the money we've already spent.
Okay, so thank you very much, Councillor. So moved by Councillor Blais, seconded by Councillor Kavanagh. On the motion, carried. Dissent by Councillor Leeper and Menard. And on the report as amended, carried. Thank you. Committee reports, rapport des comités, Committee on Protective Services, report number 4, rapport numéro 4. Item 2, Crime Prevention Ottawa, annual report received. Item 3, Bylaw and Regulatory Services, service review, and the 2018 annual report. Carried. Item number 4, rapport annuel de 2018.
Annual report, fire services.
Item number 5, rapport annuel de 2018.
Annual report, paramedic services, 2018 report.
A large discussion, or we'll hold it, okay. Item number 6, harmonization of smoke-free bylaws. Carried. Item number 7, mise à jour sur le programme des signes royaux.
Update on Royal Swans program.
Item number 8, repealing sections of the property maintenance bylaw and standards bylaw. Dissent by Councillor Blais. Dissent. Standing Committee on Environmental Protection, Waste and Water Management Report number 3, Eastern Sub-Watershed Stormwater Management Retrofit Study. Carried. Item number 10, City of Ottawa Energy Conservation and Demand Management Plan. Carried. Item 11, single-use plastic bottles at city facilities. Carried. Is it a quick one or more? Okay, Councillor Fleury.
I'm very supportive of the motion, and I wanted to carry, but I have a technical question relating to, and I've asked Mr. O'Connor this and want to make sure we clarify. Mr. O'Connor, when will you be coming back? We see other jurisdictions pass external bylaws relating to plastic bags, relating to styrofoam, relating to other single-use plastics, and we're not sure in Ontario and our city's context what are our authorities. So when do you plan to share that legal opinion with us.
Mr. Mayor, as I discussed with the Ward Council, this would be the opportune time to include it in this report. So we'll be working with staff and providing Council with a fulsome legal opinion on both what we describe as the internal and the external statutory abilities of Council in this area.
Thank you.
Carried. Item 12, membership of Council Climate Change Sponsors Group. Carried. Planning report number 9, number 13, item 13, zoning bylaw, modification de règlement de zonage 114 chemin Richmond. And Councillor Leeper has 2 motions. Who are your seconders, Councillor? I don't have a second. On both of them?
Yep.
Okay, we'll have to hold that then. We'll come back. Zoning bylaw amendment 211 Loretta Avenue, Avenue Loretta. Hold. Item 15, modification, zoning bylaw amendment, part of 450 Huntmar Drive, modification de règlement de zonage 450 Promenade Huntmar. Councillor Harder and Tierney have a technical amendment. Councillor Harder.
It's just to correct a clerical error in document 4, which is the location map. Very minor in technical correction.
So on the technical amendment by Councillor Harder, seconded by Councillor Tierney. Carried. On the report as amended. Carried. Item 16, Ontario Priorities Housing Initiative and City Capital Investment Plan for Affordable Housing. Carried. Build Heritage Subcommittee Report number 2, item 17, application to alter the property at 467 Besserer. Katsi said Besserer. Adopté. Carried. Item 18, designation of 1820 Saint Joseph Boulevard under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Carried. Build Heritage Subcommittee Report number 3, additions to Heritage Register citywide. Dissent by Councillor Tierney, and you have a direction to staff, Councillor. Do you have a motion or a direction? All right, we're going to have to hold that. Bulk consent agenda. Does anyone wish to remove anything from the bulk consent agenda at this point? On the bulk consent agenda as presented? Carried. All right, so we'll go back to the first item that we asked to be held, and I believe that was the paramedic service. Who asked at the paramedic service? Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you to the committee for receiving the annual report. Certainly appreciate the stats that are contained. 2018, we see yet another strong increase in demand. The number of responses up 3.4%. It's gone up every year, well above the rate of population increase, and we continue to have decent response times. My question to the chief or to the general manager is regarding what I find is a disturbing media report earlier this month, June 4th, where Prescott Russell states they will not respond to emergencies in neighboring communities when they're already outside of their own municipality. And I want to know that are the people of Ottawa being put at risk by the refusal by this county service to serve the people in Ottawa?
Thank you for the question, Councillor. Mr. Mayor, the actions taken by the County of Prescott Russell are being investigated by the ministry as we speak. There have been some incidents where they haven't responded. We can't say that that's created necessarily a risk. That'll come out through the investigations. The outcome of the patients has not been affected negatively.
Not yet. That's the worry I have, that when we have life-threatening medical emergencies, people expect the ambulance to show up. And so when we have cases where a resident in Ottawa has called for service and that service is being denied by, I guess, the closest paramedic in the area, how are we reporting that?
Again, thank you for the question. Through Mr. Mayor, the reporting of those incidents is an automatic function at the dispatch center, and those reports are being funneled to the province for their review and for their investigation. And as I said, those investigations are underway as we speak.
Okay, I appreciate the information. Thank you. That's all, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. So on the Paramedic Service 2018 annual report received. The next item that was held was the Royal Swan program. Councillor Kavanaugh, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. This is something that I found incredibly sad. This is something about our tradition. We are a city of traditions. We celebrate the fact we have many roots. For example, the tulips are something very important to us. It was a gift from another country, and it's something very important to us. I view the swans in the same light. This is a gift that we received from the Queen. It's over 50 years ago, and I believe that we should continue to see this tradition on and to show our heritage. And I would like to have a vote on this item, please.
Okay, so on the Royal Swans, just to remind members that a number of the swans were killed by coyotes last summer. We're down to 4, I believe, of the original descendant, or four of the white swans, and I'm not prepared to send them back out on the river to see the last 4 killed by coyotes. So I strongly support the staff report. I think it's the most humane thing to do. And yeas and nays have been called on the staff recommendation.
Councillor Tierney.
Yes.
Councillor Hubley.
Yes.
Councillor Luloff.
Think about the swans. Yes.
Councillor Fleury.
Yeah.
Councillor Moffat.
Yes.
Councillor Harder.
Yes.
Councillor DeRuse.
Yes.
Councillor El Shantiri.
Yes.
Councillor Gower. Councillor Suds.
Yes.
Councillor Eglai.
Yes.
Councillor Blais. Councillor Leeper.
Yes.
Councillor McKenney.
Yes.
Councillor Cloutier.
Oui.
Councillor Kavanaugh.
No.
Councillor Meehan.
Yes.
Councillor Shirelli. Councillor Brockington. Councillor King.
Yes.
Councillor Menard.
No.
Councillor Dudas.
Yes.
Councillor Deans.
Yes.
Mayor Watson.
Yes.
20 yeas, 2 nays.
Okay. The next item that was held is Councillor Leeper has 2 amendments for planning report number 9, item 13, 114 Richmond Road, seconded by Councillor Brockington, I believe. So Councillor Leeper, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mayor. This is with respect to the convent building that is proposed. We've been spending the last year or so, last summer, right around this time, maybe a month later, we were here to approve the heritage application. So I think most councillors are familiar with the Sceau de la Visitation convent on Richmond Road. Last summer, we approved a plan that would see Ashcroft demolish a portion of one of the wings and build the previously approved 9-story building into the convent, so it effectively becomes one structure. I am supporting having that rezoning today. There is a significant concern in the community with respect to making sure that the convent is properly restored. The previous construction can be argued to have damaged the convent. We don't want to see it further damaged, and I have two motions this afternoon that would provide some level of guarantee to the community that in the course of building the new building, it would be properly restored. So the first is that whereas an application for an addition and alteration to the property at 114 Richmond Road, known as the Sisters of the Visitation and designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act, was considered by the Built Heritage Subcommittee on August 2nd, 2018, by Planning Committee on August 28th, 2018, and approved by Council on August 29th, 2018. And whereas the report, Zoning Bylaw Amendment 114 Richmond Road, proposes an amendment to harmonize the zoning schedules to reflect the above noted approval under the Ontario Heritage Act, and whereas the protection, conservation, and restoration of the monastery needs to be ensured, therefore be it resolved that the following additional recommendation be added to the report. As a condition to be contained in the site plan control approval report, the applicant shall provide a letter of credit for the conservation and restoration of the building envelope, as well as the exterior heritage attributes of the monastery. In consultation with the applicant, the amount of securities to be provided will be to the satisfaction of the General Manager of Planning, Infrastructure, and Economic Development. So this motion, if passed, would collect securities from the developer, with the amount of those securities to be determined, that authority essentially delegated to staff, so that the amount is a reasonable amount. And then the second motion reads almost the same, therefore be it resolved that the following additional recommendation be added to the report. When the zoning report is submitted to Planning Committee for the southern portion of the property, the proposed zoning shall include a holding provision to prohibit development on such lands until an occupancy permit is issued for the monastery. So the an occupancy permit for the monastery can't be extended until the monastery has been restored. This motion would put the final phase of the Ashcroft development on hold until staff are satisfied that the building is ready for occupancy. So these two motions, I would ask you to please support me on these to provide myself and residents and staff. I have worked with staff on these motions, some confidence that the convent will be properly restored as part of this next phase of development. Otherwise, I will be supporting the rezoning, which is essentially putting into zoning the permission that we de facto approved last summer when we approved the heritage permission. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Harder on the two motions in the report.
I just wanted to say that I support these motions and that I'm comfortable with the fact that the General Manager of Planning, Infrastructure, and Economic Development will have jurisdiction over the delegation of authority of how much money that looks like, et cetera. So I'm comfortable with that. I just thought, because it didn't come up the Planning Committee, so I thought that I would just add that. So I support your motions.
Okay, so we have the first motion by Councillor Leeper and second by Councillor Brockington, carried. The second motion by Councillor Leeper and Brockington, carried. The report as amended on page 10 of our agenda, carried. Councillor Leeper, you also held 211 Loretta Avenue South, I believe. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor. And this one is we're gonna repeat the discussion here of the triplex to fourplex rezoning that I think we had a discussion around a month or so ago, and I'm going to keep doing this until we get this process under control. Once again, a developer has gone to the Committee of Adjustment and asked for the variances that are required in order to build a triplex. The community had a chance to weigh in with the Committee of Adjustment. The Committee of Adjustment approved the variances, and now the developer has come back looking for the zoning permission in order to be allowed to put a fourth unit in the building. This process is seriously undermining public confidence in the planning process at the city. There is a better way. It's a little bit loosier-goosier, but what we see is that some developers are now telling the community ahead of time that this is their intended path, that they're going to go to the Committee of Adjustment, and they tell the Committee of Adjustment, we're applying for a triplex, but we fully intend to apply for the rezoning necessary for the 4th unit. They tell it to the Committee of Adjustment ahead of time, they tell it to the community ahead of time. My intention is that when a developer has followed a transparent process with the community, I'm not going to continue to raise this objection around this table. I just want the process to be transparent. The developer is not doing anything illegal, but they have a path that we are unable as a city to deal with due to various gray areas or overlapping jurisdictions. I am asking you today to reject this rezoning in order to send the clear message to developers that when they want the 4th unit in the building, they should tell that to the Committee of Adjustment. They should tell that to residents ahead of time. Please turn this one down so that developers begin to follow that more transparent process, and I don't need to do this every month and a half. Mayor, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? This is item 14-211, Loretta, on the report. Carried.
Sorry, I had a question, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, sorry.
I had a question.
Sorry, Councillor Blais, I didn't see your name.
Mr. Willis, why is it that they have to go to the Committee of Adjustment at all? Why can't they simply go to the rezoning for 4 units?
Mr. Mayor, they can go for rezoning for 4 units. That's their option, but they're also entitled under Ontario law to seek relief from the setbacks. Because in this instance of the specific application, and Mr. James can correct me, there were very modest requirements and variances from the zoning bylaw on built form. The addition of a unit to a basement does not change built form. It's a modification of the nature of the use, and that's why they would come in later for rezoning on that element. The Councillor Leeper is quite correct. They are following a legal path through the provincial legislation, even if we, from a process perspective, don't like it.
All right, thank you.
Okay, yeas and nays, Councillor Leeper is called for. On the staff recommendation, or the Planning Committee recommendation.
Councillor Tierney.
Yes.
Councillor Hubli.
Yes.
Councillor Luloff.
Yes.
Councillor Fleury.
No.
Councillor Moffat.
Yes.
Councillor Harder.
Yes.
Councillor DeRuse.
Yes.
Councillor El Shantiri.
Yes.
Councillor Gower. Councillor Suds.
Yes.
Councillor Eglai.
No.
Councillor Blais.
Oui.
Councillor Leeper.
No.
Councillor McKinney.
Nope.
Councillor Cloutier.
Oui.
Councillor Kavanagh.
No.
Councillor Meehan.
No.
Councillor Shirelli.
Yes.
Councillor Brockington.
Yes.
Councillor King.
No.
Councillor Menard.
No.
Councillor Dudas.
No.
Councillor Deans.
No.
Mayor Watson.
Yes.
13 yeas, 10 nays.
Okay, thank you. The next item is Built Heritage Subcommittee Report number 3, rapport numéro 3 de sous-comité du patrimoine bâti. Additions to Heritage Registry citywide. Councillor Brockington has a motion, I believe, and a direction. Councillor Brockington, the floor is yours.
You're right, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much. First of all, as a member of the Built Heritage Subcommittee, we received a number of delegations, members of the public or those representing them, with respect to the list that staff have compiled for the next round of additions to the register. It became clear that a number of people who spoke were under a false impression about what being added to the register actually means to their property. There were many people who thought they would need permission from the city to renovate their property, to expand their facility, that there would be immediate property tax implications on them, that their assessment would be affected. We even had a lawyer state that there would be a notation on the title, which is not correct. So staff have enclosed in the notices that went to property owners a document called Heritage Inventory Project Identifying Properties of Cultural Heritage Value. It's a pretty good information flyer. But however, given the number of concerns that were raised which really don't have any validity to them, my direction to staff in speaking with Councillor Gower, who is the chair of the committee and is in agreement with this direction, that the following direction be made to staff, that prior to the next heritage update, staff be directed to review and update the Heritage Inventory Project Identifying Properties of Cultural Heritage Value information flyer and related communication materials with input from myself, the chair of Built Heritage Subcommittee, and any other interested members of council. So I'd like to give that direction to staff at this time.
I'm just asking, wondering about staff. This is designing a brochure by council seems a little strange. I don't know, Mr. Willis, are you okay with this direction? I'm not sure.
Mr. Mayor, staff believe the direction is actually helpful. Anything we can do to help homeowners understand that this is not a huge problem, it is just a recognition of the heritage interest of their property, we'd be glad to take the direction on that.
Okay, so that direction is given. And Councillor Brockington, you have a motion?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, thank you. There were a number of River Ward properties added or proposed to be added. Certainly spoke to a number of residents in advance who were listed. Only yesterday did I hear from one property owner who was not aware, he claims, that he had received notification from the city. He is asking to be lifted from the list of properties simply to give him time to consider what is being proposed and to seek legal counsel. I am moving a motion not to remove him permanently from the list, but to include him in the list of those properties that were being lifted temporarily, and the expectation is that this would come back in the autumn. So in accepting that this is a good faith request from my property owner and knowing that the only way to get it temporarily lifted is through coming to council today, I move, seconded by Councillor Leeper, the following: be it resolved that the list of properties recommended for deferral by the Built Heritage Subcommittee be amended by adding 61 Forest Hill Avenue, and that this property be deleted from document 1, list of properties recommended for addition to the Heritage Register. So, Mr. Mayor, that is my brief motion on the floor.
Okay, Councillor Shirelli on the motion of the report.
Support the motion. I think what we saw at Built Heritage was very predictable. Every person with an objection at the heart of it considered their property being on the registry as equivalent to a heritage designation, just because the two things have the word heritage in them. And I've checked into whether we can change the title of the registry so it becomes something like historical value properties or something, but apparently we can't do that. So with the situation facing Councillor Brockington, I'm going to support this. It's not necessarily permanent, but it gives the property owner time to ascertain the difference between a heritage designation and being on the registry, and time to see whether they have the ability to get deleted from the registry.
Okay, thank you. So we have a motion by Councillor Brockington, seconded by Councillor Leeper. Carried. On the report as amended, dissent by Councillors Tierney, DeRuse. Was that it? Okay, thank you. Okay. Disposition of items approved by committees under delegated authority suite à donner des articles ratifiés par les comités en vertu de pouvoir délégué. The Council received the list of items approved by its committees under delegated authority attached as document 1. Received. Motion to adopt reports. Motion portant adoption de rapport. Councillor Sudds, please.
That the report from Hydro Ottawa Holding Inc. entitled Hydro Ottawa Holding Inc. 2018 Annual Report, Community and Protective Services Committee Report 4, Standing Committee on Environmental Protection, Water and Waste Management Report 3, Planning Committee Report 9, Built Heritage Subcommittee Reports 2 and 3, and the report from the City Clerk and Solicitor entitled Summary of Oral and Written Public Submissions for items subject to the Planning Act explanation requirements at the City Council meeting of June 12, 2019 be received and adopted as amended.
Carried. Motions of which notice have been previously given. Motion dont avis a été donné entièrement. Councillor Brockington, please, seconded by myself.
Thank you, Your Worship, and again, thank you for seconding this motion, which I read onto the record at our last council meeting. The motion before us transitions a pilot project that the Hellenic Church of Ottawa approached Council 3 years ago, June of 2016, that installed commemorative blades on Prince of Wales as part of the Greek Fest, the very popular Greek Fest that comes to Ottawa every August. The commemorative blades say reflections of Greece, reflète de la Grèce, and have an image of a Greek symbols, and frankly, it goes over well. It adds to the cultural importance of the festival. All right. I want to get my 5 minutes worth.
So on the motion, carried. Next motion is moved by Councillor Brockington. He's been very busy with the support of Councillor El Shantiri on Khalil Gibran. Carried, okay. Next is Councillor Kavanagh, seconded by Councillor McKenney. I believe there's a replacement motion, Councillor Kavanagh, if you'd like to introduce the change.
There's some changes throughout it. Do you want me to read the whole thing, or?
I think it's the bulk of the change is the last be it resolved, I believe. Maybe read that into the record.
Okay. So this is on the legal services cuts, and there's something that hurts us eventually as a city. Therefore, be it resolved that the mayor write to the province of Ontario to ask that the provincial funding for community legal clinics be maintained, and that a copy of this motion be sent to the provincial Minister of Finance and Attorney General. This is something that is hurting us across the city. These are the kind of people that end up in our casework, and it's another burden on us as a city. The executive director is actually here today, Gary Stein. He's been working very, very hard for many years on these cases. This involves people with employment. This involves people on housing. They help people keep their housing. They make sure that they're okay and they don't lose their housing, because once they do, they end up on our lists of homeless. We need their services. We need them as partners. I urge you to support this motion.
Okay, Councillor Shirelli. Sorry, you don't want to speak? Okay, on the motion, the replacement motion, carried. Dissent by Councillors DeRuse and Hubli, and Rick Shirelli and Tim. And Harder. All right, yeas and nays?
Councillor Tierney.
No.
Councillor Hubli.
No.
Councillor Luloff.
Yes.
Councillor Fleury.
Oui.
Councillor Moffat. Councillor Harder.
No.
Councillor DeRuse.
No.
Councillor El Shantiri.
Yes.
Councillor Gower. Councillor Suds.
Yes.
Councillor Eglai.
Yes.
Councillor Blais.
Oui.
Councillor Leeper.
Yes.
Councillor McKenney.
Yes.
Councillor Councillor Cloutier, Councillor Kavanagh.
Yes.
Councillor Meehan.
Yes.
Councillor Shirelli.
No.
Councillor Brockington.
Yes.
Councillor King.
Yes.
Councillor Menard.
Yes.
Councillor Dudas.
No.
Councillor Deans.
Yes.
Mayor Watson.
Yes.
15 yeas, 6 nays.
Okay, that carries. Next is a motion by Councillor King, seconded by Councillor Fleury, and I believe we have 2 amendments. So perhaps, Councillor King, you can introduce your motion, and then we'll go to the 2 amendments.
Thank you, Your Worship.
One's a referral.
Ideally, I'm speaking to this motion because I want to see substantive action be taken to prevent any further escalation of gun violence in Ottawa. Empirical evidence demonstrates that gun crime is rising. In 2017, firearm-related violence reached a 25-year high nationally, with 7,500 incidents of violent crime involving handguns reported to police. In 2018, 76 total shooting incidents occurred in our city, resulting in 6 people killed and 24 people injured. That's why I'm proposing a motion today to address the growing issue of gun violence in our city, starting with a call for greater resources and tools that our municipality can leverage in order to reduce violence, especially in our most marginalized communities. Gun crime is a complex issue which requires a multifaceted approach, including early education for children on the dangers of guns and gangs to better enforcement measures. That is why this motion requests that our city put a larger focus on proactive neighborhood policing, along with a greater emphasis on sustained partnerships with social service organizations that work with vulnerable youth to help prevent them from getting involved in violent crime. Communities members confronting gun and gang violence across the city, including in my ward in Overbrook, along with Vanier and Hetherington, are also calling for increased investments in after-school programs and in our health and social service agencies, because there's a wide acknowledgement that a key to reducing violence involves addressing its social determinants. I know about the call of these neighborhoods firsthand, since as a former president of a community association that has been directly affected by gun violence, I've listened directly to the concerns of parents, of residents, of people whose children were affected and endangered by gun battles. Another reason why I'm encouraging you to vote for this motion is because it calls upon our mayor to write to the senior levels of government to seek more funding to address the root causes of crime. In November 2017, the federal government announced a $327.6 million over 5 years starting in 2018-2019, and $100 million annually thereafter in new federal funding to tackle the increase in gun-related violence and gang activity in Canada. Their initiative is designed to bring together federal, provincial, territorial efforts to support community-level prevention and enforcement efforts, and also to build and leverage unique federal expertise and resources to advance intelligence related to the illegal trafficking of firearms and invest in border security to interdict illicit goods, including guns and drugs. Our city should be tapping into this resource, along with asking the federal government for stronger enforcement measures, since strategies for reducing gun violence must also include enhanced regulatory and control measures. That is why my motion will also call upon our senior levels of government to ban the sale and possession of handguns and ammunition in our city, along with implementing stronger penalties for illegal gun possession and trafficking, and reviewing rules related to bail for people charged with gun crimes. As Ottawa passes the 1 million person mark, the issues our city faces will change. While a large population means increased market and cultural opportunities that will give our city greater global visibility and presence, it also means Ottawa will be the subject of more big city problems that will require sophisticated big city solutions. Gun violence is a growing concern, and it is our duty to get ahead of this problem and seek out solutions, especially solutions that seriously address poverty in our city. I believe this motion and our thoughtful dialogue around it can be a beginning. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Elshantiri, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I would like to move a referral this item to the Ottawa Police Service Board. If I can read, whereas, Mr. Mayor, to put it in a context, whereas the City of Ottawa Police Service are committed to ensuring the safety and security of our neighborhoods and community, and whereas guns and gun-related violence as a top operational priority of the Ottawa Police Service, and Ottawa and our refocused strategy to address it. And whereas the City Council remain committed to swift and resolute action to prevent further escalation of guns violence in our neighborhood. Whereas in Canada, the legislations govern the possible banning of the sale of handgun, bail for people charged with guns crime, and the rules and regulations pertain and penalties for illegal guns possession and fully within the federal jurisdiction. Whereas in Canada, the legislation governing the sale of handgun, ammunition, resides fully with the provincial government, and where under the Police Service Act, the Police Service Board determines policing priority, establish policies, and provide oversight to the Ottawa Police Service in accordance with the Act. And whereas the City Council has no authority to direct the Chief of Police or other member of the Ottawa Police Service pursuant to the Police Service Act, therefore, be it resolved that the City Council refer the Council Gang Fleury's motion regarding measures to curb gun violence to the Ottawa Police Service Board for their consideration and to support best practice and research done by the Canadian Association of Chief of Police ongoing of crime, on origin of crime guns, so they can continue to look at ways to work with and better support vulnerable youth to help prevent them from getting involved in violence and crime in consultation with Crime Prevention Ottawa. Mr. Mayor, there's a lot of effort done in the past, and I do recall you and I, we attended Guns and Gun from the federal government trying to curb this item. I believe the Ottawa Police Service Board should be the place where this motion be going to, and my colleague, I hope you support that, and who can attend the Ottawa Police Service Board meeting and speak about it, because that's the place where you have experts like a Chief of Police and senior leadership from policing can speak to this item in more what they call in the police-based evidence on the gun violence. So with that, I'll move referral, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, just point of a clarification. Councillor Brockington was going to amend, I think with a friendly amendment, Councillor King's motion. I'll just read it out here, and if Councillor King is agreeable, we'll put this on as part of the package. I think it's to be added to recommendation 3, additional resources to be provided to and greater attention to be provided by the Canadian Border Services Agency to infiltrate the illegal smuggling of firearms at Canadian ports of entry. Is that friendly, Councillor King? Okay, so we'll just go back to that. Now, on referral, we're just speaking about referral now. This is referring the King motion to the Police Services Board. Councillor Luloff, please.
I'd like to encourage my colleagues to refer this to the Police Board, as it is probably the better venue to discuss this. There's no use in enacting unenforceable bylaws, much less ones that will make no material difference, given that criminals by their very nature do not tend to follow federal law anyway, much less municipal bylaws. What's at the heart of this matter is that there is a supply of illegally obtained weapons on our streets, putting citizens of Ottawa at risk. I'd be much more apt to support initiatives that would remove those weapons while dealing with the issues that turn people to criminal activity. So let's give our social services and our police services the resources and tools they need to make a real difference. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Hubley on referral, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too will support referral on this motion because, quite frankly, I'm disappointed in the motion that my colleagues would want to blame the 60,000 legal gun owners and sports shooters in the city who have not contributed to this crime. There's no evidence in here linking any of them or any of the legal guns to the crimes that are taking place. I would have liked to have seen my colleagues colleagues take the lead from Councillor Tierney to how he handled the crisis at Jasmine Crescent. He didn't call for a ban on legal gun owners. He stepped in, worked with his community, resolved the issues in the community, and I think I'm biased, he's my friend, but I think he should be applauded for his actions, and he certainly got results in his neighborhood where this motion here would get no results for anybody and is alienating legal gun owners. So I'll support referral, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Councillor DeRuz on referral.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I will echo some of my colleague concern. This is, I think, where we're sending and referring. I will supporting that motion because Councillor King has a really good, the motion really speaks to lots of good stuff in our community, and I think that will be where the venue should be dealt with it. And I don't think that a legal gun owner are the criminal in this, and this motion kind of paint a little bit, it gives different direction in our community. So I personally think we need to really put a stricter, better justice to the people that they got caught with guns, and this is, of course, that come back to our justice system. We need to work harder with that, with those criminal activity that they are really terrorizing our communities. And I don't think the legal gun owner that they really practice, they go through lots of process. They do lots of good work in our community, and they shouldn't be banned, and they shouldn't be painted in the same brush like criminal in the street. So I will support that motion, and I encourage my colleague to support that motion also. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Shirelli on referral, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. The only way this is normally in the jurisdiction of the federal government, and we should be letting them handle it nationwide. By referring it, I think we give an opportunity to express to the Police Services Board the importance that we're placing on the gun violence issue, and that really is the best progress we can make towards fixing this issue, so I support referral.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fleury on referral.
Merci, Monsieur le Maire. Moi aussi, je vais...
Well, thanks very much, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to support the direction that has been proposed today. However, I think that we shouldn't forget one thing. The Ottawa Police Services don't yet have the tools to set up social programs for young people who get involved in gang violence. They need opportunities. There's a lot of money in gangs. There's a lot of money that's made from drugs, and kids don't feel on an equal footing with other kids. There's not one neighborhood that's not been affected by shootings, and each time there's a shooting, we sit down and we say it has to end, right? But I think that the initiative here is the right thing to do. It's in good faith. And what we're trying to do as a council is to say that we don't have all the tools, but we do have tools. We have social services, we have the police. There are lots of youth services that we can actually boost and do more with. So I want to make sure that we're also able to look at social issues, especially for youth. We go beyond the police services and look at social issues as well.
So the monitor system is not working correctly, so the motions will be put up on the big screen behind me. So Councillor Brockington, please, on referral.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just on referral, I need to have a better understanding of how this will pan out at the Police Services Board. So we are going to refer this motion as amended to the board, and at a board meeting, they're going to debate and discuss the merits of this, and then what happens? It comes back to council, or are we delegating the authority to act to the board to do X, Y, Z, what's spelled out here? Can that be explained to me, please?
Well, it really is. Once we've passed a motion of referral, the whole matter goes to the police board, and it's up to the chair and the board to decide how to answer it. I'd assume that would be put on one of their agendas, and the public could speak at that time. So that's the normal process when we refer something back to a committee or a board.
So would it be in order for a member of council to revisit this item at council if they felt that the board did not take sufficient action on this motion? Is it in order for it? Where does it go from?
Yeah, that would be up to council. You know, I think the notion here is that Councillor El-Shantiri, and I support the motion, believes it would be more appropriate that this item be referred to the the Police Services Board.
There are definitely merits in Councillor King's motion that I agree should be debated and discussed at the board. I, as a member of this council, want feedback from the board. The Police Services Board deals with police matters more or less internally to their board, so I'm looking for some really concrete action. So I am going to support referral on that matter, but I do have to provide this comment, and that is, I think similar to Councillor Luloff, until we address really the root causes of poverty and why people are attracted to gangs, and we don't address the lack of educational attainment and employment opportunities for marginal youth, we'll only be dealing with this problem at the very end and not focusing our resources at the beginning where we should be. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cloutier on referral, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Maire. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too will, of course, support the referral to the Ottawa Police Services Board and the focus. And I wonder how Community Protective Services can also be involved in this. The whole issue of the new approach with respect to funding and community involvement with respect to persons who commit gun crimes. It will be important at Police Services Board to get some information from our police service with respect to the impact that banning handguns in Ottawa, the impact that would have on gun crime. As Deputy Mayor Luloff said quite correctly, criminals don't follow the law, criminals don't have licenses, and the majority of gun crimes are done with illegal weapons, which would have no impact, which would not be impacted at all with respect to banning the possession of guns in Ottawa. And so those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Merci, Conseiller Cloutier.
Thank you, Councillor Cloutier.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I will be supporting referral because I think it's important for us to have a very thoughtful dialogue, and that's what I had said from the outset about this serious issue that's affecting many communities, especially marginalized, low-income, high-needs communities in our city. It's important for us to look at all the facets, and I think that that's the most important thing in terms of gun violence, is to not just look at the gun ban component of it. My feeling is I am not trying to target anybody specifically, and I've been trying to have a very thoughtful discussion in the public sphere and actually as well listen to everyone and their perspectives, because of course I would like to be Councillor Hubely's friend as well around this table. So the way I view it is that we should have a wholesome, fulsome debate and a thorough one that does look at issues such as the social determinants. But we can't do one without the other. That's just my perspective. I don't want to be completely ideological about this. It's more of a philosophical approach.
When you, Councillor?
Yes.
Back on referral.
Yes. So I'm going to support referral. I do believe that we can have a greater conversation about this and look at the root causes of the issue of gun violence. But as I said, there's a different perspective, and that perspective is if there are less guns on our streets in our cities, there is less homicide in our cities. And I will continue to hold to that view. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Great, thank you, Councillor King. And we know that we added Councillor Brockington's point to Councillor King's motion. So on referral, carried. Thank you. Next item is Councillor Fleury, seconded by Councillor King, please.
Monsieur le Maire, la motion a été présentée.
Mayor, this motion, would you want me to read it again?
The Salvation Army.
The Salvation Army, is that the one?
It's been presented last time and it's on the screen.
Yeah, it's your call. You have 5 minutes.
I'd like to speak last, if I can.
You'll get a chance to wrap up.
Okay.
But you can speak now.
I have nothing to say other than wrapping up and presenting the motion that's in front of us, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so the motion's been introduced. Councillor Luloff.
Merci, Monsieur le Maire. Ce vote est...
Well, this is the most difficult decision that I've had to make so far as a new councillor.
SOS Vanier survey, and I encouraged them to keep up the fight and showed my support. I said I do not support clustering shelter beds in one neighborhood, and I stand by that. Présentement, 3 refuges se retrouvent.
Currently, there are 3 refuge shelters in the Bywood Market. This isn't a tenable situation, in my view.
The scope of the project has shrunk considerably. The project will now include housing, something that our city desperately needs, and something that we're committed to investing $15 million in this year. Drug counseling has been moved off-site. The Salvation Army told me this morning that they will have dedicated private beds for homeless veterans, something that's near and dear to my heart as well. These are all wins for SOS Vanier, but I still don't think it's enough. Ce sont les victoires pour SOS Vanier.
These are victories for SOS Vanier, but I don't think it's enough yet.
The idea of even needing a new shelter. I would much rather see this site become home to several units of supportive and affordable housing. Je ne crois pas.
I don't believe that Main Street in the neighborhood is the right place for this type of shelter, especially when efforts are being made to encourage the economic development of Vanier. As a municipal councillor, we're talking out of both sides of our mouth at the same time, I think.
Piece of duct tape on Deepwater Horizon. They also go against our plan to invest in housing first. We're investing $15 million in this budget on affordable housing because it's the right model. Emergency shelter beds are not, but we need them for now, and they could save a life on a frigid winter night. I wanted the community to be heard. I wanted the Salvation Army to listen. And quite frankly, I wanted this matter settled before I sat at this table. Mon équipe a rencontré Drew Dobson et SOS.
My team met with Drew Dobson from SOS Vanier yesterday, and I called him personally this morning. I listened to the representatives of the Salvation Army. I took the time to read each of the emails that I've received in favor of this motion. And I've also taken the time to listen to Councillor Fleury's point of view as well. But in all good conscience, I can't support a motion which is designed to disqualify this shelter on a technical point. This is what the previous council decided to do.
If more work could have been done at the earlier stages of this process to come to a more amicable agreement between the residents of Vanier and the Salvation Army. Process matters. When was the last time the City of Ottawa withdrew zoning amendments for a not-for-profit providing services to our vulnerable? The answer is never. Would we even be considering this motion today if it was for Wabano or for Cornerstone? I'm troubled by the lack of nuance on this issue as well, especially in the media and in the emails that I'm receiving. It is detrimental to approach this issue as exclusively good on one side and exclusively bad on the other. We need to destigmatize needing social support. Je crois que tous les quartiers,
all neighborhoods across the city, I think, have the duty to support our residents, especially the most vulnerable residents.
More than their share. Orleans is home to Les Terrasses by Montfort. They provide supportive living for those suffering from mental health and addiction. And I know that Laura Dudas and I are proud to have them in our community, and I realize that if I was in the same position as the member for Vanier, I'd be pushing for a new location off the main street as well. We need to hold Salvation Army's feet to the fire to ensure that the modifications that were announced yesterday at the 11th hour actually happen. And I want them to continue to work with SOS Vanier to take these modifications a step further. If we want to free up emergency beds, build affordable housing and build supportive housing. If you really want to work yourselves out of a job of providing these beds, be a part of the solution. Build affordable housing on this site. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Luloff. Councillor McKenney, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to start just by recognizing the people that run the shelters in this city. We have very dedicated staff in the shelters. I've been in most, if not all of them, and the work that they do day in and day out with the absolute most vulnerable people in our community is to be recognized. And I also represent a ward in this city that has many halfway homes, shelters, rooming houses, but I also represent people who are sleeping outside. And point I made earlier about, having some 23 people who lost their home in a rooming house fire sleeping outside. It's not because they couldn't go to the shelter, but they chose not to. And I hear that from a lot of people. And this is not the fault of the shelters. We built this system. I can go back into the history of why we built the system, but we did. And we are now housing people for a year, 2, sometimes 3 years, and they're in there and they're not well. They've suffering from mental illness. They develop mental illness while they're in the shelter for a variety of reasons, and it can be a frightening place, and people don't want to go into them. And the reality is that we have to make some pretty tough decisions when we get to City Council. And, it's for me to say no to a new shelter with, new rooms and new beds is difficult when I see, we have a mother and son who sleep out on the Adirondack chairs every night here at City Hall. And we've got some 40 to 50 people who sleep either in Confederation Park. There's a couple bridges they're allowed, and a few grates along Kent and Sparks that they're allowed to be at, but they have to be up before the sun rises. So it's a difficult thing to say no to a shelter, to a new shelter. But the reality is that if we are going to solve homelessness, and we have a growing and persistent chronic homeless population in this city, and if you are in a rooming house or if you are in a shelter, you are homeless. And the only way we're going to do that, it's one pot of money. And the only way we're going to do that is to make difficult decisions. And we've got to end homelessness. And ending homelessness doesn't start by building a new shelter. Ending homelessness starts with all of us, with the community, with the sector that's got the expertise in our housing sector, and our staff to come together with a plan, with real targets and real actions on how we're going to end chronic homelessness, and also how we're going to move people out of unaffordable housing. We've got some 19,000 people in the city, people who are low income, who are spending over 50% of their income on shelter alone. 50%. Their kids aren't eating well, they're going to school, they're not doing well as a result. And these are growing and persistent problems that we have in a very wealthy city. And part of the problem with our wealth is when we look at average median incomes and we start looking at affordability around that, the people who are on our wait list today for the registry, for example, who need housing, can't afford what we call affordable housing. We've got to build deep affordability into our system. We've got to start standing up to the challenges in front of us. We've got to make sure that as we're moving forward, we've got a new official plan. It's a really exciting time in this city. We've just hit 1 million, but we can't leave people behind. And the reality is that building a new shelter is not the direction we should be going in. It's not ideological. I understand the work that's being done by Salvation Army, by the Mission, by Cornerstone, by Shepherds. But we've got to look at how we're going to approach this problem as a growing city, as a wealthy city. And around this table, we've got a decision to make today on which direction we're going to take. Thank you.
Councillor Cloutier, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Maire. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've had several conversations with Councillor Fleury since the start of June, when he told me what he intended to do.
With respect to what Councillor McKenney just said, I would say that this is not a motion with respect to revisiting the substance of the decisions by Planning Committee and Council in November 2017. This is a completely different tact, and the evidence of that is, and Councillor Luloff referred to it in the lack of nuance, how short the therefore is. Just repeal the bylaw. And thus, I guess we depend on the whereases in the motion, because that's what we're dealing with, to get some guidance. And there are six of them, and they generally deal with the ownership of the property. And so I guess my question is with respect to this motion, as it is presented, tel qu'elle est décrite, my question is to Mr. O'Connor, given that they deal with the ownership of the property. The Salvation Army had a signed declaration at the outset of the planning process with respect to the ownership of the property, which was later corrected. It was later corrected in the written record, in the report, and with questions by Councillor Fleury at the Planning Committee. Given that, Mr. O'Connor, does that in of itself dictate or require a repeal of the bylaw?
No, Mr. Mayor.
With respect to the fact that they have not executed an agreement of purchase and sale as of now, does that require a repeal of the bylaw?
No, Mr. Mayor.
With respect to them not providing, and recognizing that it's at LPAT now, not providing a copy of the agreement of purchase and sale, does that in of itself require or lead to a repeal of the bylaw?
No, Mr. Mayor.
And just the last item, if the Salvation Army does not close on the property, what happens to the zoning bylaw application?
Mr. Mayor, when these applications were brought forward and passed by Council in November of 2017, there was a motion that Council approved, which stated that if the Governing Council of the Salvation Army of Canada ceased to operate the facility at Montreal Road, the bylaws would be repealed at that time. And therefore, it can be inferred that if the Salvation Army never starts to operate them at Montreal Road, then the bylaws would not come into effect or would be repealed once we know the outcome of the purchase and sale, which is a private negotiation between two parties.
And so if they don't gain the right to purchase the property, automatically the bylaw would be repealed.
Mr. Mayor.
That's the inference.
Yes, I believe that's the inference.
Okay. Subject to interpretation and further. Got it. And so I guess to Mr. O'Connor, just to wrap it up, have we ever repealed? Councillor Luloff did not ask you. Have we ever repealed a zoning bylaw for a not-for-profit organization?
Mr. Mayor, I asked the planning lawyers involved in this file and searched my memory, and no, I'm not aware of such an action.
Okay. And so thank you for that. And so I would like to direct my council colleagues to the motion as it is written. I understand, and I don't necessarily disagree with what Councillor McKenney was talking about with respect to as a city requiring a larger strategy, a more mature strategy with respect to the issues of chronic homelessness, addiction, and all of those elements, and the support that is required there. But that is not what this motion is. And so thank you for allowing me to put those comments on.
Merci. Councillor Shirelli, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I wasn't able to take part in the debate when we first dealt with this because I had a distant deemed potential pecuniary interest, translation being that my daughter worked at the shelter until just recently. The issue in front of us, I think, rests a lot on the legal interpretation of it, and I've heard in the news about a number of changes that were proposed, a number of changes that were accepted, and I'm wondering how many of those happened after the approval, and what is the legal status of the approval? Is it as it was when Council originally approved it?
Mr. Mayor, I would seek clarification as to whether the question is with respect to site plan or with respect to the official plan and zoning amendments that we are discussing today.
Yeah. So number of beds, that kind of thing, is that under site plan?
Mr. Mayor, we are presently involved in a litigation before the tribunal, and there has been no concrete proposal put forward to the litigation team with respect to any changes to what we've seen to date.
So we don't actually know if what's being bandied about in the media is going to become of legal status or whether it's going to stay the way it was the day it was passed.
That is correct, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. The second question is, I've been on planning committee probably over 25 years, and I've always been told that in that we are not supposed to consider, there are a lot of things we're supposed to consider, but we're not supposed to consider who actually owns the property. And is that still the case? Because the planning principles we're supposed to apply relate to rezoning applications that can come from the property owner, they can come from a constituent, they can come from a corporation or anyone else.
That is correct, Mr. Mayor. Ownership of the property is not a relevant planning consideration when the city looks at a zoning or official plan amendment.
All right, okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Councillor Egli, please.
Mayor, you know, I think back to last term of council and the amount of days, committee days, council days that were devoted to a discussion and a debate around this topic, and the opportunity provided to the public to come in and speak to the matter. And I don't see Chair Harder in the room right now, but and you know how she shepherded, so to speak, the issue through the public process over a number of days. So there was more than ample opportunity at that time for everybody to have their say, to ask their questions, to make their presentations. And frankly, nothing has changed since we went through that very lengthy presentation and process and debate. My colleague has built an argument around the statement, I'm not going to say fact, the statement that the Salvation Army was not transparent as to the question of ownership of the property. And yet we know independently that the staff report reflected that. They did not own the property. And the councillor himself asked the question in the public forum at the committee meeting of the Salvation Army and was given the answer that they were not the owners of the property at that time. So none of that is new. And to suggest that it is new, to use that as the basis, the foundation of this motion, that's a very shaky foundation. And to Councillor Cloutier's point, when we're looking at this motion, we have to look at the whereases. And the whereases don't stand very tall. They don't have substance because we know independently they are not accurate. We know that it was fully public knowledge and in front of the voting members of council at the time who did and did not own the property. So none of that is new. And there, again, there was fulsome debate and more than ample opportunity for the public to come out and speak to this matter. And to Councillor Chiarelli's point, it's not a point of planning law to even ask that question. It's not relevant to the decision made. So I understand fully why Councillor Fleury has to try this on. He feels passionately about this. His community feels passionately about it. We saw that passion, we felt that passion during last term, during the discussion and the debate. But a decision was taken. The decision was taken on the information that was available, and that same information is available today. It's not different, it hasn't changed. The community has a right of appeal. They've exercised that right of appeal. The appeal is currently ongoing. And if we made the wrong decision, if we're going down the wrong path, the appeal process can speak to that. But I don't think it's appropriate for council to re-engage on this issue that we've already talked about, heard about, discussed, analyzed, debated. The decision has been made. And the appeal process, as I say, is the appropriate way to deal with the fact that someone or some group or some community may not be in agreement with that particular decision, but it has been made. And if you're thinking of voting in favor of this motion, look to the whereases, see if they stand up. And I suggest to you very strongly that they do not stand up. There's no basis in the whereases for this motion to go forward and be voted on in a positive way. We knew the facts at the time. We took those into account for whatever weight we should have given to them. And again, to Councillor Chiarelli's point, the weight we should have given them was not all that much. But we heard the community, we heard the stakeholders, we heard the debate, we heard from staff, and we made the decision. And I suggest that we have to move on. And there is the appeal process. It's available. It's being exercised. And again, if we were wrong, we'll be told we were wrong, and we'll be set down a different path. And so I would urge people not to reopen this issue, not to start the clock running again. We made our decision, and we made it, again, after very careful deliberation, very careful consultation with community, stakeholders, and staff. And I think we should stick with that decision. And again, while I recognize what Councillor Fleury may want to try to do this, there really is no basis for it whatsoever in his motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Aglai. Councillor King on the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do want to point out some material changes. Council has changed. Maybe I'm just thinking about myself around the table here, but it has changed. And one of the other things that I think has changed that my colleague, Councillor Fleury, has pointed out is that the perception has changed in our minds. I would say that noting that I was president of a community association, once again, that was adjacent to Vanier, and who had requests from that community to protect it, in a sense, and protect planning principles. I think that's what it comes down to. I mean, in our submission, I unfortunately didn't have the honor to make the deputation to planning committee, but I think I do see somebody in the audience who did on our behalf, on a neighboring community that understands the challenges with the concentration of poverty, because that is a central issue. One of the driving principles that the community association looked at was trying to adhere to our 10-year homelessness strategy that the city had committed itself to. A housing first model, which purported aim is to prioritize housing based on need. You know, unfortunately, multiple reports on ending homelessness in the city showed a continued persistent use of emergency shelters due to a lack of new affordable housing being built by the city. For the housing first model to be effective, people experiencing homelessness must be quickly moved into independent and permanent housing and then provided additional supports and services as needed. Such a model only works when housing is decentralized rather than concentrated in one geographical location within a municipality. Through wider community dispersion, formerly homeless people have achieved better success at integration and becoming a productive part of a community. Area and surrounding residents, including those in Overbrook and Castle Heights in my ward, objected to this proposed project because it did not serve the homeless population well, nor did it add to the health or vitality of the communities surrounding it. They believed at the time that the housing first model should have been followed, that we should have reinstated the $4 million of discretionary spending on new affordable housing that was eliminated from the budget in 2015. And they also believed, and this is a philosophical approach, despite the fact that I commend the Salvation Army for the wonderful work that it does, because I do believe it contributes in a major way in a major positive way in our community. But we did contend that the city should commit to a 21st century public social housing model for its residents, rather than one that reflects another time, frankly. So these were the issues that were in front of us when I was at the community association, and I know that the perception that we had was that the property, around the issues of the property, that it was a done deal. And I think that the community does want that reflected in the decisions that are made by this new council in this term. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor King. Councillor Meehan, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I too am a new councillor, just like you, Ralston. And when this issue was galvanizing the city in 2015, I was watching it with great fascination. And I questioned myself at the time, thinking, if I had to make a decision, how would I vote? Because voting against the Salvation Army, it just seems it would be unthinkable, because I'm a great supporter of the Salvation Army and the work that they do in the community, as I think most of us are. They do wonderful work, and we truly appreciate what they do for the needy in our community. But that said, I also recognized that a mega shelter in a community can change a community. And at the same time, that studies are showing that, as Councillor King said, that there is a new way of thinking about housing the most needy in our community, and that is housing first. So I've done some reading. I've done a lot of reading over the last few days, and having this opportunity to have a say in this very contentious issue is really daunting. It's going to be one of the toughest decisions we have to make. I was in consultation with the Salvation Army yesterday, and I do appreciate that they have scaled down their plans for Montreal Road, but it disturbs me that they came at the last, like the 11th hour, and that they are not legally binding on the Salvation Army. So that bothers me. At the same time, we have just made, as a city, a major commitment and major contribution in developing Montreal Road. And Montreal Road really is the heart of Vanier. And I really don't believe that a mega shelter belongs on a main street. So this is a very, very tough decision. I do not want this vote to be taken as anti-Salvation Army or anything, but I am putting myself in the shoes of people who live in Vanier. By keeping the addiction center downtown on George Street, by reducing the number of shelter beds, I'm not sure that anybody's well served by this, because they can't say for sure whether or not the shelter beds number will be actually decrease. It's between 70 and 100. There's still going to be a good component of shelter beds there. I do support better housing models for the community, and I think that we can work toward that. So that said, it's a very tough decision, and I'm not taking it lightly. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Brockington, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was here last term of council for the 3 days of debate and discussion on this item. I voted against the zoning bylaw exemption application as I believed it was inappropriate for a traditional main street. That is the planning rationale. I do believe that the concentration of services in one particular neighborhood is inappropriate, already facing its fair share of challenges. That was certainly a secondary issue that was on my mind. I never saw this as a vote against the Salvation Army, ever. I saw this as a vote about whether or not it was appropriate to accommodate their proposal within a particular neighborhood. That was how I framed the argument and believed, as I just said, that on a traditional main street it was not appropriate. I've been overwhelmed, like many members of council, with a flurry of email and statements over the last week, and I think Councillor Luloff referenced the 11th hour, and now all of a sudden there's this proposal to amend the initial multi-use center with something that may be reduced. It doesn't say anything about a reduced building. They are enumerating their services that will be within it. Develop new supportive housing in partnership with a supportive housing provider, reduce the number of emergency shelter beds, keep the addictions treatment program at the George Street location. That's a surprise. I thought the city wanted to have one of its 3 centers within the market area, the Shepherds of Good Hope, the Mission, Salvation Army, to relocate. And reaffirm its commitment of 60 special care medical beds supported by Ottawa Inner Health. So just so I'm 100% sure, Mr. O'Connor, a question to you through the mayor. Whatever decision council makes today, Salvation Army has released a press release stating its new intentions. It's not binding. They're just making a statement that this is a new direction they'd like to go. This, may provide some comfort to folks who are struggling with the motion before us. But I just want you to confirm that what they're proposing is just that. It's a proposal. They could tomorrow say, you know what? That's now off the table. We're going to go right back to the multi-use center that we had proposed 2 years ago.
Mr. Mayor, I haven't seen the latest proposal or press release, but I would agree with the ward councillor in this instance that no, it is what it is. It would be a proposal.
So just talking this out just on procedure, let's assume that the motion before us today passes and the Salvation Army wishes to proceed with their revised plan. Do they reapply for another zoning bylaw amendment application? How would that work?
Mr. Mayor, I think the question is the status of the current application should the motion pass today. And it's the opinion of legal services that if the motion is successful, the position under the Planning Act would be that City Council has failed to make a decision on either the official plan or the zoning bylaw, which would then permit the Salvation Army to file an appeal for non-decision at the tribunal, as their applications have been in since 2017.
So can you just explain that again? We are being asked to support repealing the 2 bylaws, which I assume are the bylaws that gave them authority, the bylaw permission to do that. If it's repealed, again, what is the status?
So the status of the current applications would be that the city has failed to make a decision on those applications, but it would certainly be in the purview of the Salvation Army to withdraw and file a new application with any new proposal that they wish to bring forward.
And what would happen to the current appeal that is about to go and be heard later this year? Does that become moot?
Mr. Mayor, the city legal services would seek a position from City Council to bring forward to the tribunal, but if we are in fact on a status of non-decision, then it is probable that that appeal would be moot, the present appeal, and we would then be looking at whether the Salvation Army takes action to bring an appeal for non-decision to the tribunal.
Okay, I think that information is very helpful to me, so I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Harder, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you everyone for your input, and thanks to all the folks that came out from SOS Vanier. I wanted to I just wanted to say that we have two members of council who are lawyers, and both of them have spoken quite well, I think, as to what is before us today and how we got here. Those of us that were on the council in the last term certainly remember the work that was undertaken by the staff, by the community, by the ward councillor, by the applicant. And always the Salvation Army said that they were going to continue to work with the community, continue to listen to the community. So I find it disheartening, if you will, for anyone to say that, you know, all of a sudden they've come up with a different rendition. I also find it disheartening to hear somebody saying that it's just a stance that they're taking, that they're just, you know, trying to get another win. They already had the support of a council that listened for 3 days, that listened to everyone, that read copious amounts of submissions that were worked on hard by the community, by various groups. We took it very seriously. And now we have an appeal process. And the appeal has come from the community and others. But certainly there is a process that is at play. I strongly recommend that we stick with the process we have. I would hope that the Salvation Army will continue to work with that community, not with the community, but with the community and the greater city and the different people that are involved here, because you know what? I like the fact that they're willing. I haven't seen the new ideas. It hasn't been presented to me. I don't know whether some of you have, and I haven't had time to read the paper this morning, and I think that meeting was maybe yesterday. But to think that they don't work in good faith for the betterment of our city would be absolutely wrong. And I don't think that should in any way, I don't think it's right that's brought up in fact. You know what? We look at all the disasters we've gone through in the last 2 years and the significant role that they play doing what they do, taking care of people, taking care of our people. And you know, if we had built all the affordable housing that we think that we need. We keep throwing out the 10,000 people on the list, and we know that there's other people that are homeless people, and add them that we don't even know that quantity. If we built every unit that we think that we know, we're a prosperous city. People would continue to come here for support from us. We do our very best, as does the Salvation Army. I encourage you to let the process play out, let the appeal go through. We made a hard decision. We made, I think, the right decision. And I look forward to an evolution of perhaps more coming from the intentions and the commitment of the Salvation Army. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Fleury to wrap up. Does anyone else wish to speak before Councillor Fleury? Okay, go ahead.
Merci, Monsieur le Maire. I'd just like to begin with one question to staff, which is, Mr. Willis, could you confirm that if they were to submit what they talked about yesterday, that they would require the same official plan amendment?
Mr. Mayor, if they were to start a new application, yes, a reduced bed count in a shelter would still require an official plan amendment.
Thank you. Alors, premièrement, j'aimerais m'excuser.
So first of all, I'd like to apologize to my family. I didn't spend much time with them in the past couple of weeks. That's because I put a motion on the table that forced me to work really hard. So I apologize to my family for that.
In reality, this is a new council. This is a new council. We're allowed, as the memo from Mr. O'Connor presented, we're allowed to vote on the matter. We're not being challenged on the consequences of that. Mr. O'Connor says that, and the legal team is saying we're up for appeal if we repeal it. I have external community legal opinion that I've shared with council that says otherwise. So, you know, take it to where it is. We might not be appealable on that. We might be. What we know is the worst is we're finding ourselves in October in court, and the city either takes the previous position or the other one. what I live with the Salvation Army, I cannot express. It is not an organization that I try to be against, but the last 48 hours is what I've had over the last 2 years. It's, oh yeah, we're engaging with you, we're engaging with you. We take your feedback, and then boom, land something that again is against what the community's talked about. That's what I've lived in the community rooms, in those meetings. And again, now I'm happy that the community sees it, and I'm happy to hear some colleagues who are speaking to that, saying, hey, the last 11th hour, something comes up. The Salvation Army had 2 weeks when I presented my notice of motion to present what is the sale agreement. I hear from the owner of the existing site that they're looking for new purchasers, that they're meeting with developers. They showed up at a community meeting recently on the CIP saying they're interested in looking at new options. What does that mean for this? Council's waiting, saying, oh, this will happen, and you know what, let the process be. We have a new council. We've approved a budget in 2019 with $15 million in new initiative. We're coming back with the term of council priority. We want to invest in housing. Why do we keep having this cloud of hope that something will happen? We are the control of our destiny. As the requirement from the province, the City of Ottawa is the service manager for the sector. If we look at the 2016 numbers, the City of Ottawa, not the residents of Ottawa, but the City of Ottawa funded this organization. Close to 80% of their revenue from that year came from the City of Ottawa. So when we hide on our hands and say, look, yeah, we might be happy with the organization, we might be proud of the work they do, but at the same time, we need to bring some leadership around the table as to where are we going in terms of our investments in housing. And we can't, on one hand, saying, well, we're going to continue to manage this issue, and on the other hand, saying we want to resolve homelessness. We either cure it or we continue to manage it, and if we manage it, we're going to continue to see an increase in our operational budgets. So we have today 10,000 people on the waiting list. We have every night 1,000 people that sleep in our shelters, and that demographic's shifted too. We have way more families. The proposal that's in front of us has no family options, no family bedrooms. We have Indigenous communities. We know the historic challenges between the Salvation Army and our Indigenous population. We have women needs for housing. There's no women's shelter beds at the Salvation Army. We haven't had the chance to ask them about the residential component because it's presented in the last 24 hours. So all that I'm asking for is for council, and that's why my therefore be resolved is so simple, is to really take a position, regroup as a council, get the term of council priority, and align our strategies around investment in housing. That's what I'm asking of council, and if not, well, don't fake yourself. We're going to the Ontario Municipal Board, and after the board, the courts aren't done. We're going to keep going. So it's not like if the Salvation Army, if it continues to require OPA, will get carte blanche after the OMB, no matter that decision. We'll continue to be in court for years. So council, wake up, because you're not going to see that investment ever. We need to see investments in housing. And to do so, we need to bring a term of council priority, and we need to continue to focus city dollars like we did last budget, $15 million, a record that this council decided to invest strategically.
Okay, thank you very much. Members of council, we're faced with an extraordinary and challenging issue today. A not-for-profit charitable organization, the Salvation Army, applied for a rezoning and an official plan amendment in the last term of council. They succeeded in securing these approvals, and the city is already preparing a defense for the LPAT hearing on this issue. Mr. O'Connor, can you inform council the amount of money spent to date for the city to defend council's position?
Mr. Mayor, at this point in time, we have spent $148,000 on pre-hearing matters, and then there's a 3-week hearing in October and November of this year.
Thank you. So let's take a moment to review the facts. Prenez un instant pour revoir les faits dans ce dossier.
So let's review the facts in this file.
Publicly acknowledge that the initial development application did not clearly indicate that they were the conditional owner of the property. That was later clarified in exchange between the ward councillor and the Salvation Army at Planning Committee. Rick O'Connor sent a detailed memo to council on June 21st detailing these facts. In the memo, he advises council that the city has taken the position that council was aware of the fact that the Salvation Army was the site owner through a conditional purchase and sale agreement. Anyone who's bought a house 90% of people who buy a house have a conditional offer. That's pretty standard practice, pending a building inspection and so on. So Mr. O'Connor went and took the further step to send around a memo and a quote from the Salvation Army representative who spoke at council, Mr. Jeff Barrett, who stated in response to the ward councillor's question, and I quote, "I confirm that we do not own the site, but we do have a firm conditional offer in place," end quote. That is the crux of the argument that the councillor is bringing this forward, that council did not know that it was not the Salvation Army did not own the property. That is fundamentally untrue. The ward councillor himself asked the question, and the reply was, "I can confirm that we do not own the site, but we do have a firm conditional offer in place." And this quote is available on audio from the November 14th, 2017 Planning Committee. So the facts are very clear. Council knew before voting on the Salvation Army rezoning that the Salvation Army had made a conditional offer to acquire the property at 333 Montreal Road. Now, earlier this week, the ward councillor issued another memo to members of council, once again accusing the Salvation Army of misrepresenting the facts, which the clerk clarified in his memo to council. Now, I can't imagine how council would be reacting today if we were treating any other not-for-profit organization like the way we're treating the Salvation Army. I'm convinced that members of council would not tolerate such an attack on any of the numerous not-for-profit organizations that strive to serve our community's most vulnerable citizens. So let's get back to the issue of the proposal to revoke the zoning, because I think one member of council pointed it out. It's one paragraph that would revoke the zoning of the Salvation Army for 333 Montreal Road. And I'll ask the clerk a couple other questions. From a planning perspective, Mr. O'Connor, what would be the legal effect, in your opinion, if council acted today to revoke their zoning?
Mr. Mayor, as we've previously indicated both in the memo from June 21 and earlier this afternoon, the effect would be to nullify the original decision, leaving the Salvation Army in the position of having council had made a non-decision.
And can you please provide us your opinion on the city's odds of success if the Salvation Army chooses to appeal such an extraordinary decision?
Mr. Mayor, that would be, quite frankly, 180 degrees in the other direction. It would be a do-over of sorts. I anticipate that planning staff and others might be subpoenaed by the Salvation Army. That would leave us then engaging external planning consultants and other people. And also, as a result of that, I think there'd be a low probability of success.
And can you provide us an estimate, given the fact that you couldn't allow our staff to perjure themselves, you'd have to get outside experts and the legal costs, what the cost to the city to defend such a reversal would be?
Mr. Mayor, I'm of the view that it would be in excess of $250,000 as a ballpark figure.
Okay, and dernière question pour le greffier.
Last question for City Clerk.
Timeline related to the city or the community's involvement in the LPAT or any other proceeding that would require us to vote on this motion today?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. On the specific attempt to dezone the Salvation Army's previous planning approval, our clerk and city solicitor has provided the best advice to council, and I quote, "Repealing the bylaws will result in a non-decision scenario for the applications by the Salvation Army, at which point the applicants will have the opportunity to file a further appeal at the LPAT in respect to council's failure to either approve or refuse the application." So once again, the outcome is crystal clear, and taxpayers will be on the hook for hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees to hire experts to testify against the city's original position, a position which the city has already started defending at LPAT as we speak. In fact, our own expert planning staff, as I mentioned, will be called to as witnesses for the Salvation Army to defend their position. Now, on Monday, June 24th, the Salvation Army met with local stakeholders to discuss options to modify their proposals to address a number of community concerns. The revised proposal seeks to address the precise issues that some members of council used in opposing their initial application, including the president of Ottawa Community Housing and our housing and homelessness liaison. This week, the Salvation Army issued a public statement in which they pledged to work with the community to build the Montreal Road Community Hub into a community-based facility that will include, one, a significant supportive housing partnership, as some members of council had sought, Secondly, the new supportive housing partnership will serve disadvantaged residents from all walks of life, including men, women, families, seniors, and veterans. In so doing, they're directly addressing the concerns raised by some members of council that the organization was only focused on serving men. They're proposing to reduce the number of shelter beds from 140 to between 90 to 100. Now, in the last term of council, we heard repeated calls from the Salvation Army to reduce the size of the shelter proposal. Further, they are now proposing not to move the addictions treatment program to the new Montreal Road location. You'll recall the ward councillor and community representatives argue in favor of a more decentralized model for the delivery of certain elements of the Salvation Army's service model. I want to make it perfectly clear that these proposed changes are not before us for approval. The Salvation Army has the zoning in place to continue consulting with the community to undertake these changes. Now, the same people who called for the Salvation Army to compromise and reduce the scope of the proposals are now moving the goalposts and saying that no proposal from the Salvation Army is acceptable to them. So, members of council, I'd urge you in the strongest possible terms to say no to this attempt to essentially revisit the previous council decision based on a complete fabrication about which there is zero confusion. Every member of the previous council knew exactly the ownership because the question was asked at Planning Committee, and all of the final documents indicated clearly it was a conditional offer. So this is in many ways grasping at a situation which, if we go down this path, will end up costing us hundreds of thousands of dollars, which, by the way, could be better placed into housing and homelessness initiatives. Alors, merci à vous tous pour votre bon travail.
So thank you all for your good work to help the most vulnerable in the community.
Councillor Fleury's motion to dezone the Salvation Army.
Councillor Tierney.
No.
Councillor Hubley.
No.
Councillor Luloff.
No.
Councillor Fleury.
Oui.
Councillor Moffat. Councillor Harder.
No.
Councillor DeRuse.
No.
Councillor El-Shantiri.
No.
Councillor Gower. Councillor Suds.
No.
Councillor Eglai.
No.
Conseil Blais.
No.
Councillor Leeper.
Oui.
Councillor McKenney.
Yes.
Conseil Cloutier.
No.
Councillor Kavanaugh.
Yes.
Councillor Meehan.
Yes.
Councillor Shirelli.
Yes.
Councillor Brockington.
Yes.
Councillor King.
Yes.
Councillor Menard.
Yes.
Councillor Dudas.
No.
Councillor Deans.
Yes.
Mayor Watson.
No.
11 yeas, 12 nays. Sorry,
That item is
correction,
complete.
10 to 12.
Okay, Councillor El-Shantiri, seconded by Councillor Harder, has a motion on the municipal elections, and Councillor Hubley has a friendly amendment. So, Councillor El-Shantiri, would you like to move the motion, please?
If I can get a mic. Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, this is this motion prepared by staff to about the Modernization of Municipal Election Act 2016, Bill 181, received royal assent on June 9, 2016, and introduced a new statutory framework governing advertisement by registered third party. And whereas the two bylaw governing election sign in bylaw 2003-520 as amended, signs on city roads, bylaw number 2004-239 as amended, temporary sign on private property. And whereas in response to Bill 181, Council approved a staff report to amend the two bylaws governing election sign, bylaw 2003-520 and bylaw 2004-239, to ensure that these are bylaws address the sign of registered third party, and where the amendment to the bylaw 2003-520 proposed by staff wrongly include reference to election sign dimension that had been previously repealed by Council on May 26, 2004, through its approval of amending bylaw 2004-250, and where federal election is scheduled for Monday, October 21st, 2019, and staff recommended clarifying the rules concerning election sign dimension for the signs of public roadway for the next federal election and all future municipal, provincial, and federal election, and whereas under bylaw 2003-520, signs on a city road, signs on public property are only permitted 30 days before voting day, and whereas under bylaw number 2004-239, temporary sign on private property, sign on public property are only permitted 30 days before the voting. And we're under Section 57 of Canada Election Act. The federal election period must last between a minimum of 36 days and maximum of 50 days, i.e. at an election. And this period does not align with the 30 days period set out by bylaw 2003-520. And whereas enforcement of signed bylaw during an election period requires significant municipal resources, therefore be it resolved that staff be directed to amend bylaw 2003-520 to remove all size restriction for election sign on public roadway, and there be a further resolve that staff be directed to amend bylaw 2003-520 for the purpose of 2019 general election, such as sign be permitted on public property once the Chief Electoral Officer of Canada issue the writ, which will be between minimum of 36 days to a maximum of 50 days before federal voting day. We had further resolved that staff be directed to review the bylaw governing election sign to consider the potential for broader and longer-term amendment, and that staff be directed to report back to Council as a part of midterm governing review or at the earliest policy review opportunity, and be a further resolve that staff from the Office of the City Clerk and Solicitor be directed to list the appropriate amending bylaw on the next Council agenda.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Elshintiri. I know, Councillor Hubely, you have a friendly amendment that was included in this now, so you're satisfied with that. Councillor, did you want to speak any further?
No, Mr. Mayor, but this is prepared by staff to close the loophole on what's been done before.
Okay,
thank you.
On the upcoming federal election. Councillor Shirelli?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I am supporting the motion. There isn't anything to be afraid of for council on this issue because there's a practical issue, which is that Coroplast comes in only certain sizes of sheet, so they can't make them extremely bigger than you've seen out there. And this is coming from someone whose opponents in the last election both had signs that were bigger than mine. So I just think it makes a lot of sense, and it avoids a lot of interaction, anger and disputes that will go on all through an election if that happens. And I do point out, although my signs are smaller, they have always been reused, and that's a good sign.
Okay, Councillor Leeper.
Thanks, Mayor. I think a couple of us are looking a little askance at the proposal to remove the restriction on the sign size. What is the current restriction on the sign size, or is there any?
Mr. Mayor, if I may clarify, Council previously repealed the size restrictions that were in effect as roughly in 2003.
Okay.
In advance of the 2018 election, the provincial government amended the Municipal Elections Act and introduced a framework regulating third-party advertisers. Because staff wanted to be able to enforce signs not only for candidates but also for third-party advertisers, we sought to amend the definition section. Unfortunately, when we did so, we referred to the wrong version of the bylaw.
Okay.
So what we did is we reintroduced something that council had already repealed. Unfortunately, I don't have the exact dimensions in front of me, but in essence, what we're returning to is what council had intended.
But yeah, so council's previously expressed intent 16 years ago was not to have restrictions on the signs. Okay.
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
And this is just the need to remove this is just consequential to an amendment that was made at some point. Forgive my asking, but are we still able to control the size of signs if those are unsafe? For example, if somebody puts up a big-ass sign somewhere in a corner that restricts sight lines and that sort of stuff, are we still able to work with roads to?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, okay.
Anything else, Councillor Leeper?
Sorry. Thank you, Mayor. That's
Thank you, Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you. Just a quick question. Why is it necessary for us to go through this process? Is this happening across the country at different municipalities that they have to do this? Or is this just correcting an error we happen to make?
Yes to both, Mr. Mayor. In terms of regulating signs, that is jurisdiction of municipal council. And in this case, we would like, or we recommend that council clarify by way of this resolution to correct staff's error.
Okay,
and just to add to that, Mr. Mayor, part of the resolution was also to bring this back during midterm governance. When this was introduced as a notice 2 weeks ago, a number of councillors asked if we could look at a number of other options, including not having any signs on public property, and we said we would do that at midterm. So I think it's aligned with that type of question.
Okay, so are we allowing we're saying that the federal regulations are the dominant ones, not ours? I just want to make sure I understand that.
Mr. Mayor, one of the issues that the City of Ottawa has faced in the past is that under the legislation that governs federal and provincial elections, the writ period in the case of a federal election is 36 to 50 days. In the case of a provincial election, it's 36 to 50 days. The election kicks off in earnest with the issuance of the writs. However, the city's bylaw restricts signs on public property for 30 days. So that means at a minimum of at least 6 days, signs are at times placed illegally, and that requires significant resources on the part of city staff to go enforce that when they might otherwise be enforcing other things.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. Anything else on the motion? Carried. Motions requiring suspension of the rules of procedure. Notice is a motion for consideration at subsequent meeting. Councillor Cloutier, please. Seconded by Councillor Egg.
Merci, Monsieur le Maire. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is similar to the motion that Councillor Eglai introduced on May 8th, and it's with respect to an ISD project in a neighbourhood where the private approach bylaw is normally enforced on a complaint-driven basis, and that there has been no complaints. The request is for city staff to reinstate the private approaches as per they currently are when the reconstruction of the Tampa Avenue, Denver, Gibson, and Orlando are completed this summer. Mr. Mayor, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, do you want to waive the rules and approve this now? You support it? Okay, on suspension? Carried. On Councillor Cloutier and Eglai's motion? Carried. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Next is Councillor Fleury. Notice of motion.
Mr. Mayor, I read this motion last council and asked for the waiver of the procedure, so I'm glad to reread it, but just bringing it as a notice of motion to respect the procedure.
Councillor Harder. Councillor Shirelli, I'm sorry.
Okay. So my question is, are we voting on this now? Are we voting on the waiver of the rules now?
No, it's a notice of motion.
You can waive the rules if you want.
Was it last time? Like what? I don't understand.
On waiver, carried. Moved by Councillor Harder, seconded by Councillor Shirelli. Seconded by DeRuse. On waiver, carried. Opposed? Okay. All right, yeas and nays on waiving the rules to deal with this today.
Councillor Tierney.
Yes.
Councillor Hubley.
Yes.
Councillor Luloff.
Yes.
Conseil Fleury.
No.
Councillor Moffat. Councillor Harder. Councillor DeRuse.
Yes.
Councillor El Shantiri.
Yes.
Councillor Gower. Councillor Suds.
Yes.
Councillor Eglai.
Yes.
Councillor Blais.
Yeah.
Councillor Leeper.
No.
Councillor McKenney.
No.
Conseil Cloutier.
Oui.
Councillor Kavanagh.
No.
Councillor Meehan.
No.
Councillor Shirelli.
No.
Councillor Brockington.
No.
Councillor King.
No.
Councillor Menard.
No.
Councillor Dudas.
Yes.
Councillor Deans.
No.
Mayor Watson.
Yes.
12 yeas, 10 nays.
So it required 17, I believe, to be dealt with?
That's
Okay.
correct, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so we'll deal with that at the next meeting. Next is the election contribution rebate program. Councillor El Shantiri, please. Seconded by Councillor Blais.
Thank you, Your Worship. And this is about the election contribution rebate program, Mr. Mayor, to have extension due to the state of emergency the municipality have. If you like, I can read the whereas it, but maybe I should.
Yeah, I think it's pretty straightforward. This is a technical requirement because of those people who are dealing with the flooding and
With
so
the
on.
flood, didn't have time
An
to
extension.
apply,
So we'll deal with that at the next meeting.
Okay.
Any other notices of motion for consideration of subsequent meeting? Motion to introduce bylaws. Councillor Suds, please.
That the bylaws listed on the agenda under motion to introduce bylaws, 3 readings, be read and passed.
On the motion, carried. Confirmation bylaw. Councillor Suds.
That the following bylaw be read and passed to confirm the proceedings of the council meeting on June 26, 2019.
Carried. Inquiries, we have one written inquiry from Councillor Menard.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. The inquiry is just, would any emergencies such as flooding or a tornado allow us to revisit any previously approved council spending decisions? What criteria is used to determine which emergencies would warrant a revisiting of council-approved decisions? What fund is normally used for emergencies in our city?
Great. Councillor Suds, adjournment, please.
That the proceedings of the City Council meeting, June 26, 2019, be adjourned.
Carried. Cordially invite you all to join Councillor Menard and I at the Flora Footbridge launch, which will take place in 45 minutes, and meeting adjourned.